Get comfortable. Settle in. This one is going to take a while, and that is completely intentional. For the next 4 hours, we are going to move slowly through one of the most densely layered animated shows ever put to screen. No rushing, no skipping ahead, just a quiet, careful walk through 36 years of hidden details, buried jokes, secret connections, and background mysteries that most people have never noticed, not because they were not looking, but because The Simpsons hid them so well and so patiently that you almost have to stop trying to find them before they reveal themselves. So close your eyes if you want, let the words drift in. Everything we are going to talk about tonight has been sitting inside the show the whole time, waiting. Section 1. The secret language of the couch gag. Every episode of The Simpsons begins the same way. The camera sweeps through clouds. Springfield appears below, rendered in that particular shade of late afternoon gold that the show has used since 1989. We pass the nuclear power plant, its cooling towers trailing a thin thread of yellow smoke into an impossibly blue sky. We pass the tire fire, which has been burning continuously for 36 years and shows no signs of stopping. We fly over the rooftops of a town that does not exist anywhere on any map, and then we cut to Springfield Elementary, where Bart is writing something on the chalkboard, and then to the music room where Lisa plays a different extended saxophone note every single time, and then outside to the street, where Homer nearly gets run over by his own car, and then finally, after all of that, the family converges on the living room couch. And something happens to them on that couch. Sometimes they sit down normally and the camera pushes in and the episode begins. But most of the time, something goes wrong or strange or wonderful, and the couch becomes a stage for a tiny act of visual invention that has nothing to do with anything that follows. They are chased off the couch by a monster. They are flattened by the couch falling from the ceiling. They arrive as different characters from a different show. They materialize from a fax machine. They are painted by a Renaissance master. They emerge from a magician's hat. One of them is missing and the others look at the empty space and then back at the camera, and then the episode begins anyway. The couch gag has been part of The Simpsons since the very first episode, which aired on the 17th of December 1989. That first gag was simple. The family ran in, the couch was too small, and they were squeezed together like sardines. It lasted 3 seconds. Nobody thought much of it. By season 4, the couch gag had already become something different. The gags were getting longer, they were getting stranger. They were starting to contain things that had nothing to do with comedy and everything to do with the show's internal mythology. And by the time the show hit its peak seasons roughly 5 through 12, the couch gag had become the most reliable delivery system for hidden information in the entire series. Here is what most people do not know about the couch gag. It is not random. It is not simply a funny thing that happens before the episode. In many cases, the couch gag is a preview, a comment, or a coded signal about something happening in the episode that follows. The show's writers, particularly during the golden era, use the couch gag the way a book designer uses a dust jacket illustration. It tells you something about what is inside, if you know how to read it. Let us start with one of the most famous couch gags in the show's history, because it also happens to be one of the most misunderstood. Season 5, Episode 13. Homer Goes to College. The couch gag for this episode shows the family running into the living room to find another family already sitting on their couch. This other family is dressed identically to The Simpsons. Same yellow skin, same overbites, same hairstyles. The two families stare at each other. Nobody moves. The episode begins. Most people read this as a simple visual joke. There is another Simpson family. But watch the episode that follows. Homer Goes to College is an episode about Homer trying to fit in at university, about feeling like an imposter, about the anxiety of being surrounded by people who seem to belong somewhere that you do not. The couch gag, watched in that context, is not a joke. It is a thesis statement. The family that belongs on the couch and the family that does not. The original and the copy. The person who is supposed to be there and the person who is not sure they deserve their place. The couch gag is doing emotional foreshadowing in 3 seconds of visual comedy. This pattern shows up throughout the golden era so consistently that once you see it, it becomes impossible to unsee. Season 6. Homer Badman. The couch gag shows the family running in to find a darkened room and a single spotlight falling on the couch. A drum roll, a cymbal crash, and then nothing. The couch is empty. The family stands in the dark, waiting for something. The episode begins. Homer Badman is one of the show's most famous episodes. It is the one where Homer is falsely accused of sexual harassment and becomes the subject of a media witch hunt. He is put on trial in the court of public opinion. He waits for justice that is slow in coming and uncertain when it arrives. The couch gag set all of that up in 5 seconds. An empty spotlight, a drum roll that goes nowhere, waiting for something that may not come. Season 7. King-size Homer. The couch gag shows the family running in, but Homer is enormous, comically overweight beyond what the show normally depicts, and he cannot fit on the couch. He tries. He squeezes. He spills over the sides. The others are pushed off. The episode that follows is literally about Homer gaining weight on purpose in order to be classified as disabled, so he does not have to go into work. The couch gag is not set up. It is the episode, compressed. Now here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the couch gag has also been used to hide information that is not about the episode at all, information about the show itself, about the production, about things happening behind the scenes that the writers needed to communicate to the audience without saying them out loud. Season 9. The Principal and the Pauper. We have discussed this episode in other contexts, the episode where Principal Skinner is revealed to be an imposter named Armin Tamzarian. The couch gag for this episode is unusual. The family runs in and sits down perfectly normally. The couch gag appears to be over, but then the camera zooms out to reveal that the living room is itself a painting, hanging on the wall of a much larger living room. And that living room is also a painting hanging on the wall of another room. The image recedes infinitely. The family is inside a frame, inside a frame, inside a frame, and the real world, if there is one, is somewhere outside the last frame, invisible and unreachable. The episode that follows is about the discovery that the identity everyone trusted was itself a frame within a frame. The real Skinner inside the fake Skinner inside the Springfield community that accepted the fake. The couch gag is not previewing the episode. It is explaining the episode's philosophical structure. It is telling you, before a single word of dialogue has been spoken, that this story is about layers of reality, about the frames we build around ourselves, and the frames within which we are built. There is a subcategory of couch gag that the fandom has noticed but rarely discussed at length, and it is the category of gags that seem to reference episodes that do not exist. These are the couch gags that depict events so specific, so narratively rich, so emotionally loaded, that they feel like they were drawn from a full episode rather than invented for a 30-second opening sequence. And yet no such episode exists. Season 8. The couch gag that shows the family assembling themselves from component parts. Arms arrive first, then legs, then torsos, then heads. Homer's head arrives last and is placed on the wrong body before being moved to the correct one. Everyone sits down. The episode begins. This gag works as comedy on its own terms, but it also reads as a meditation on identity and construction, on the idea that a person is an assembly of parts that could, theoretically, be rearranged. It gestures toward a version of The Simpsons where Homer's consciousness exists independent of his body, which connects, if you follow the thread long enough, to the coma theory, to the idea that Homer's mind and Homer's physical form may have parted ways at some point in the show's history. The couch gag could be read as a visual diagram of that split, the head placed on the wrong body, the self that does not quite fit its container. Season 12. The couch gag that shows each family member arriving from a different direction and different medium. Homer is a shadow puppet. Marge is a sock puppet. Bart is a crayon drawing. Lisa is a paper cutout. Maggie is a real human baby, filmed on actual film stock, sitting incongruously among the cartoons. They all sit on the couch together. The couch holds them. The episode begins. The use of a real human baby for Maggie in a couch gag that otherwise depicts the family in radically different visual registers is strange enough to warrant attention. Is the show suggesting that Maggie is somehow more real than the others, more present in the physical world, more connected to something outside the cartoon frame? If the coma theory is true and Homer is dreaming his family into existence, Maggie's appearance as an actual human child might be the couch gag quietly telling you that she is the only member of the family who exists in the real world, the only one not generated by Homer's sleeping mind. That is a reading, not a fact. But The Simpsons has always rewarded readings. Beyond the foreshadowing and the encoded messages, the couch gag has also been used as a space for genuine artistic ambition that the main episode structure could not accommodate. Some of the most formally inventive animation the show has ever produced lives in couch gags, and some of those gags contain hidden content that requires frame-by-frame viewing to fully appreciate. The couch gag from Bart Gets Famous, Season 5, is a good example. The family runs in, sits down, and the camera slowly zooms in on the television they are watching. On the television is a smaller version of the same living room, with a smaller version of the same family watching a smaller television. This continues for several iterations until the screen becomes too small to resolve the detail. But here is the thing that almost nobody has caught in real-time viewing. On the smallest visible television, the show being watched is not The Simpsons. It is a different show entirely, rendered in a different visual style. You can see it for approximately one frame, before the resolution becomes too poor to identify. Whether this is a genuine Easter egg referencing a specific show, or simply abstract animation used to fill the frame, has never been confirmed by the production team. But it is there, and it has been there since 1994. The couch gag from Homer the Vigilante contains what animators call a crowd gag, a moment in which a large number of background characters appear simultaneously, and many of them are doing things that are not directly relevant to the main action. In this case, the crowd is gathered around the Simpson couch, watching the family sit down as if it is a sporting event. Look carefully at the background crowd and you will find, hidden among the recognizable Springfield residents, at least 3 characters who have never appeared in any episode of the show before or since. They are drawn in the same style, yellow-skinned and 4-fingered, but their faces are not in any character database, any production Bible, any reference guide. They simply exist in this one crowd shot, this one couch gag, this one passing moment, and then they are gone. Who put them there? Are they simply filler figures drawn by a background artist who wanted to add something nobody would notice? Or are they something else characters who were designed for episodes that were never produced? Or characters whose stories were cut before they ever reached the screen? The show has never said. The couch gags produced during the later seasons, roughly season 15 onward, take a different approach from the golden era gags. They tend to be longer, more elaborate, more self-contained. They began to bring in outside directors and animators, people with their own visual languages and their own ideas about what the couch could be used for. In 2014, the street artist Banksy directed a couch gag that became one of the most discussed pieces of television animation produced in the last 20 years. It depicted the production of The Simpsons as a nightmarish outsourced factory operation, with underpaid workers in a bleak overseas facility painting the show's cells by hand, stuffing merchandise into boxes, and performing other labor in conditions that the gag depicted as exploitative and grim. A kitten was used to power a cell sealing machine. A unicorn with a face of despair had its horn used to punch holes in DVD cases. The gag was controversial. Fox was reportedly uncomfortable with it. The show aired it anyway. And buried inside it, visible only if you pause the video at the right moment, is a placard on the factory wall that reads in the same handwritten font that Bart uses on the chalkboard, a phrase that has never been fully agreed upon by anyone who has studied it. Some readers see a labor rights slogan. Some see a quote from a specific economist. Some see what appears to be an internal Fox memo, reproduced verbatim, about the show's own production budget. Whether this reading is accurate, whether the text actually says what some viewers believe it says, has never been confirmed. Banksy has not commented on it. The production team has not commented on it. It is simply there, or it appears to be there, at the edge of visibility, in a couch gag that was already making a pointed statement about what it costs to make something that looks effortless. There is also the category of couch gag that references itself. The show has, on multiple occasions, produced couch gags that are explicitly about the couch gag, about the repetition of the sequence, about the absurdity of a family sitting down on a couch being treated as an event worth marking every single week. These meta-gags are often read as the writers running out of ideas, as a kind of creative exhaustion made visible, but they can be read another way. A couch gag that is about the couch gag is a show becoming aware of its own structure. It is a cartoon, acknowledging that it is a cartoon. And in the context of a show as narratively layered as The Simpsons, that awareness, that moment where the show looks at itself and notices that it is looking, carries a weight that pure comedy does not. One of these self-referential gags, from season 23, shows the family running in to find the couch gag already in progress. There is a previous version of the family already on the couch, and a previous version of the living room around it, and the two versions of the family stare at each other across the boundary between the current episode and some undefined earlier iteration. The new family wins the standoff, the old family fades, the episode begins. This gag has been read as a comment on the show's endless self-revision, on the way the floating timeline rewrites character histories, on the way earlier seasons are quietly overwritten by later ones, without acknowledgement. The old family is not wrong. The old family is simply no longer current. And Springfield has made peace with that, the way it makes peace with everything else. Season 26 introduced a couch gag directed by the animator Don Hertzfeldt, whose work exists in a maximally different visual universe from The Simpsons' smooth, color-saturated world. His gag depicted a far future version of the show, in which the characters had been distorted beyond recognition by centuries of automated production, their faces stretched and multiplied and corrupted until they were no longer legible as human or cartoon or anything with a stable identity. The show within the show had been running so long that it had consumed itself. Homer existed as a floating cluster of attributes, yellow, male, nuclear, donuts, that no longer cohered into a person. The couch was there, recognizable even in the wreckage, and Homer, whatever Homer had become, still tried to sit on it. Still reached for the familiar shape of home even after everything that made him Homer had dissolved. That couch gag, 7 minutes long and explicitly described by Hertzfeldt as a horror piece, contains hidden text at multiple points in its runtime. Some of it is legible. Some of it appears to be random character strings. Some of it, viewed at the right moment and at sufficient resolution, appears to be a list of episode titles, not episode titles from any existing season of The Simpsons, but episode titles that follow the show's naming conventions exactly, formatted identically to how The Simpsons labels its episodes, suggesting a season of television that does not exist and may never have existed anywhere except inside the Hertzfeldt couch gag. Whether these are genuine unproduced episode concepts or simply invented titles designed to give the gag an additional layer of depth, nobody has confirmed, but they are there. And they suggest that even in a guest-directed couch gag that is explicitly about the show's own eventual decay and self-destruction, someone thought it was worth hiding something. That is the couch gag. 36 years of it. A sequence so familiar that most people stop watching it by season 3, and so layered with information that you could spend a career studying only this one piece of the show and never reach the bottom of it. The family runs in, something happens, they sit down, the episode begins, and somewhere in the space between the running and the sitting, if you are paying close attention, the show tells you something it could not say any other way. Drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is there, and if you have not already, subscribe so you do not miss the rest of this one. We are only just getting started. Number. Section 2. Hidden messages in the background art? If the couch gag is the show's front door, the place where hidden information is delivered with a wink and a nudge, then the backgrounds are its architecture. They are the walls and floors and ceilings of Springfield, and they have been carrying messages since the very beginning. Most television animation, particularly American television animation of the late 1980s and early 1990s, treated backgrounds as exactly what the word implies, the thing behind the thing that matters. Characters move in the foreground. Backgrounds hold the world in place. They are furniture, not story. They fill the frame, they establish location, and they stay out of the way. The Simpsons was never interested in this approach. From the very beginning, the show's production design team, led for the first several seasons by the art director Kathy Ahern and populated by artists who came from outside the conventional animation pipeline, treated backgrounds as a secondary, narrative layer. The idea, never stated explicitly in any production document but visible in the work itself, was that Springfield should be a place where things happened even when nobody was looking, where the background kept living even when the foreground was busy with plot, where a careful viewer could always find something the casual viewer missed. The mechanism for this was the background gag, a visual joke, reference, or piece of information placed in the background of a shot, often in a location that the camera does not linger on and that the primary action gives you no reason to notice. The background gag is the show's way of rewarding the viewer who is paying too much attention. It is a gift left for someone specific, and that someone is whoever happens to notice. But beyond the comedy, the background art of The Simpsons contains something more substantial. It contains a consistent visual language, a set of recurring symbols, images, and architectural details that appear across decades and dozens of different locations within Springfield, and that, when mapped across the full run of the show, tell a story that no individual episode ever tells directly. Let us begin with the most immediately obvious element of Springfield's background art: the signs. Springfield is a town covered in signage. Every storefront has a sign. Every public building has a placard. Every truck that passes through the background of a street scene has a logo on its side. Most of these are jokes, and most of the jokes are excellent. The show's writers have always been particularly good at inventing fictional brand names and business names that work as comedy on their own terms. But embedded within the comedy, if you look at enough of them, and in the right sequence, a pattern emerges. Springfield signs tell the history of the town. Not its recent history, not the events of individual episodes, the deep history, the history that predates the Simpsons family, predates the nuclear power plant, predates any character we have ever followed through a story. The signs reference businesses and institutions that no longer exist, that appear only in the background and only in certain episodes, that bear dates and slogans that suggest they were established at specific historical moments. And those moments, when assembled, describe a Springfield that was built across time in layers, a town that has been accumulating history for far longer than any of its current residents seem aware. There is a storefront visible in at least 4 separate episodes, always in the background, always half obscured by other things, that bears the name Conover Brothers Dry Goods, Est 1891. Nobody in the show ever mentions this store. No character ever enters it. In none of the 4 episodes in which it appears is it relevant to any plot. It is simply there, on a street in Springfield, suggesting that in 1891, 2 brothers named Conover established a dry goods operation in this town. That means Springfield existed in 1891. It had commerce. It had families. It had brothers going into business together at a time when the show's narrative does not reach. There is a war memorial visible in the background of episodes set in the town square. The memorial lists names of Springfield residents who served in various conflicts, and the list is long enough to suggest that Springfield has been sending its people to war since the 1800s. The names on the memorial do not match the names of any character who appears in the show. They are entirely new people, Springfield residents who existed before the show's timeline, who lived and served and died and left their names on stone in the center of town, and who the show has never directly acknowledged. The oldest date visible on the memorial, according to viewers who have paused and magnified the relevant frames, appears to be 1847, which would mean Springfield's history of sending people to war predates the Civil War, which would mean the town existed before the Civil War, which is consistent with the architectural style of some of Springfield's older buildings, which have, in various background shots, displayed the kind of Greek Revival facades that were fashionable in American architecture between roughly 1820 and 1860. Springfield is old. The show has always known this, and the background art has always communicated it, quietly, to anyone who was looking. Now, let us move from the historical to the personal. Because the most interesting hidden messages in Springfield's backgrounds are not the ones that tell you about the town. They are the ones that tell you about specific characters, specific relationships, and specific events that the main narrative has never explicitly addressed. The first thing you need to know is that the backgrounds of the Simpson house are not accidental. The objects that appear in the background of the family living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms, these objects were chosen deliberately by the production design team, and they change over the course of the series in ways that reflect the emotional state of the family, even when the family's emotional state is never discussed in the episode's dialogue. In the early seasons, roughly 1 through 4, the Simpson living room contains a photograph on the mantelpiece that shows a young Homer and a young Marge, clearly at a formal event of some kind, dressed up, happy, looking at each other rather than at the camera. The photograph is small. It is not a focal point of any shot, but it is consistently there, and it is consistently positioned in a way that makes it visible in shots that show the fireplace. Then, in Season 5, the photograph disappears. A different photograph replaces it, one that shows the whole family, all 5 of them, posed in the style of a formal portrait. Homer and Marge are no longer looking at each other. They are looking at the camera, the way people look at cameras when someone has told them to. This change was never addressed in any episode. The show did not do an episode about Homer and Marge changing the photograph on the mantelpiece. It simply happened. Between seasons, between episodes, in the background, where most people were not looking. But the change in the photograph corresponds, in the show's chronology, to the period during which Homer and Marge's relationship was most actively explored in the main narrative, the period during which the show was most directly engaging with the question of whether these two people should still be together. The photograph of two people looking at each other with uncomplicated happiness was replaced by a photograph of a family performing togetherness for a camera. Whether this was intentional commentary by the production design team or simply a practical change made for unrelated reasons that happened to carry emotional resonance is something only the people who made it could answer. But the resonance is there, and it is hard to read as accidental. There is a more specific hidden message in the background of the kitchen in the episode in which Homer considers taking a job in a different city. The episode is primarily about Homer's professional ambitions and his family's complicated feelings about the possibility of leaving Springfield. In the background of the kitchen scenes that the episode uses primarily as neutral domestic space for characters to have conversations, there is a calendar on the wall. This is not unusual. The Simpson kitchen has always had a calendar. But in this episode, the calendar is turned to a month and year that do not match the episode's air date. The calendar shows a date approximately 3 years in the future. And on that future date, someone has written something in small handwriting that is not legible in standard definition, but becomes readable in high definition. A name, what appears to be a location, and a time. Whether this is a reference to a specific planned future episode that was later canceled, or a production error that nobody caught, or a deliberate Easter egg planted by a background artist who wanted to leave something for posterity, is unknown. The show has never acknowledged it. The background art of Springfield Elementary has its own set of hidden messages, distinct from those of the Simpson home, and these tend to be more directly comedic but no less carefully placed. The hallways of the school are lined with motivational posters, and these posters change depending on which episode you are watching. In most cases, the posters are generic enough to read as simple set dressing, but in episodes where the main story involves specific themes, academic failure, social exclusion, the tension between individual talent and institutional conformity, the posters in the background shift to reflect those themes in ways that are too precise to be coincidental. In the episode where Lisa is excluded from an advanced academic program because of a clerical error, the hallways of Springfield Elementary are lined with posters about the importance of following procedures and filling out the correct forms. Not about learning, not about achievement, about paperwork. The posters look, at first glance, like generic school corridor art. Read in the context of the episode's story, they are indictments of the same bureaucratic machinery that is failing Lisa in the foreground of every scene. The background is editorializing about the foreground, and doing it through institutional graphic design. In the episode where Bart temporarily becomes popular after appearing in a television commercial, the school hallways are lined with posters that appear, at first glance, to be about academic subjects. Read more carefully. They are all about the nature of celebrity, the difference between real accomplishment and performed accomplishment, the way institutions respond to fame, the question of whether a child who is famous for something trivial deserves the same treatment as a child who has earned recognition through effort. These are not things the episode says out loud. They are things the background art says, quietly, in the margins. The power plant backgrounds deserve their own extended discussion because they are some of the most carefully designed spaces in the show's history, and they contain more hidden information than any other location in Springfield. The nuclear power plant is not just where Homer works. It is the engine of the show's mythology, the source of Springfield's contamination, the physical embodiment of Mr. Burns's power over the town. And the backgrounds of the plant reflect this status in ways that go far beyond simple production design. The control room where Homer works is covered in warning labels. This is, on its surface, a joke, the gag being that the most dangerous room in the most dangerous facility in Springfield is full of warnings that Homer ignores. But the warning labels are real. They are based on actual Nuclear Regulatory Commission signage designed to NRC specifications, placed in positions that correspond to where such labels would actually be placed in a real pressurized water reactor control room. The show's background artists did research. They looked at how nuclear facilities are actually labeled, and they reproduced that labeling accurately. And then they placed Homer, a man who uses plutonium, as a paperweight in the center of it. This means that the comedy of Homer's incompetence is being performed against a background that is technically accurate. The joke is not that the warning labels are wrong or exaggerated. The joke is that the warning labels are absolutely correct, and Homer cannot read them. The background is not satirizing nuclear safety protocols. The background is faithfully representing nuclear safety protocols. The satire is in the foreground, in the person who was entrusted with following those protocols, hidden within the warning labels, in a detail that requires extremely high resolution to confirm but has been verified by multiple separate viewers across different seasons, is a recurring label that does not correspond to any actual NRC safety designation. It reads, in the same font and format as the legitimate labels around it, Sector 7G, authorized personnel only. This is not Homer's sector. Homer works in Sector 7G. The label does not say 7G. It says 7G, written out, which is a subtle enough difference that it reads as a typo or a production inconsistency, but it appears multiple times, always in the same format, always in the same position relative to Homer's workstation. And the separation of the number from the letter 7G, rather than 7G, is the kind of detail that does not happen accidentally in professional animation production. Someone made a choice about how to render that sign. They made the same choice multiple times. The reasons for that choice have never been explained. Beyond the power plant, the most densely layered background location in the show is Moe's Tavern. Moe's has been in the show since the beginning, and like the Simpson house, its background details have accumulated and shifted across the decades in ways that reflect the emotional and narrative history of the space. The bottles behind Moe's bar are always visible, and they change. Not radically. Moe's is always recognizably Moe's, but the specific brands and bottles on the shelves are different in almost every episode, and the changes are not random. In episodes where characters experience loss, the higher shelves of Moe's bar are fuller. In episodes that end happily, some bottles have been moved to lower positions, as if Moe has been serving from them. The bar is, in a very quiet way, keeping score. It is tracking what the characters are going through by tracking how much they have been drinking. Whether this was a conscious choice by the background art team or an organic consequence of the production process, bottles being added and rearranged by different artists across different episodes without a master reference, is impossible to say from the outside. But the pattern is consistent enough across enough seasons that it invites the reading. Moe's bar full of untouched bottles in a sad episode. Moe's bar with visible gaps in a happy one. The background measuring the emotional temperature of the show in the language of inventory. There are also images hidden in Moe's back wall that have never been fully cataloged. The back wall of Moe's Tavern, the wall behind the bar, the one Moe leans against when he is being terrible to someone, is covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and hand-drawn pictures that change from episode to episode. Most of these are too small to read in standard viewing. But in high definition, and particularly in episodes broadcast after the show moved to HD production around season 20, enough of these items become legible to paint a picture of Moe's personal history that has never been directly addressed in any episode. There are photographs that appear to show a younger Moe, recognizably Moe. That face is impossible to mistake in places and situations that the show has never referenced. A photograph that might be Moe at a graduation ceremony, wearing a cap and gown that does not correspond to any school in Springfield. A photograph of Moe standing next to a woman whose face is never fully visible, always turned away or obscured, suggesting a relationship that the show has gestured toward in passing but never developed. A newspaper clipping that appears to reference an event involving Moe's Tavern in a year that, if the date visible on the clipping is accurate, predates the establishment of Moe's Tavern as depicted in the show's canon. The bar's own history contradicts its background art, or the background art preserves a history that the main narrative chose not to follow. The most striking hidden message in all of Springfield's background art, and the one that has generated the most sustained fan analysis over the years, is not in any single building. It is in the sky. Springfield's sky changes color in ways that most viewers never consciously register. In episodes that deal with happy family moments, with resolution, with the kind of warm, domestic satisfaction that the show delivers when it wants you to feel safe, the sky visible through Springfield's windows tends toward a specific shade of amber, a warm, late afternoon gold that reads as comfort, as the right time of day, as the hour before dinner, when everything is where it should be. In episodes that deal with darkness, with loss, with the underlying horror of Springfield's reality, the sky shifts. It becomes a particular shade of green, not bright green, not vivid, but a muted, sickly green that sits at the edge of yellow, the kind of green that appears in the sky before a severe storm. This green sky appears in the backgrounds of episodes about nuclear accidents, about illness, about Burns's manipulation of the town, about the contamination of the water supply. It is never a central element of any shot. It is always peripheral, glimpsed through a window, visible at the edge of an outdoor scene. But it appears consistently enough, in contextually appropriate episodes, that it reads as intentional. Springfield's sky is a mood indicator, and the mood it indicates when it goes green is the mood of a town that has been quietly poisoned and has not yet fully understood what that means. The green sky and the amber sky, the warning labels that no one reads, the war memorial that predates the show's timeline, the photograph of Homer and Marge that changed between seasons, the bottles at Moe's that track the emotional history of the show in the language of how much alcohol a town has consumed. Springfield's background art is not decoration, it is testimony. It is the show's way of continuing the story in the margins, in the spaces where the camera passes without lingering, in the details that reward the person who is watching too closely or not quite closely enough. The backgrounds have always been talking. Most people have just never been in the right position to hear them. Number section 3. The Springfield Cemetery. Every gravestone has a story. Springfield has a cemetery. This is, in itself, not unusual. Most towns have cemeteries, but Springfield's cemetery is unusual in the way that everything about Springfield is unusual, which is to say that it appears to follow the normal rules of how a cemetery works and then quietly does not. The cemetery appears in the show irregularly. It is not a central location the way Moe's Tavern or Springfield Elementary are central. It shows up when the plot requires it for funerals, for scenes of grief, for the Halloween episodes that use it as a backdrop for supernatural events, and then it recedes back into the geography of Springfield and stays there until it is needed again. But like everything else in Springfield's background art, the cemetery has been accumulating information across the run of the show that adds up to something considerably stranger and more interesting than a simple backdrop for sad scenes. Let us start with the most immediate question. Who is buried there? The gravestones in the Springfield Cemetery, visible in various degrees of resolution across dozens of episodes, carry names. Most of these names are jokes. The comedy graveyard tradition of using death markers as a vehicle for puns and satirical epitaphs is as old as American comedy itself, and The Simpsons has always been comfortable within that tradition. A gravestone that reads, "Here lies Frank Ormand, the pretzel man, coiled in death as in life." A gravestone that reads, "Beloved father, he called M as he saw M." These are comedy headstones. They are funny. They are not trying to be anything else. But alongside these comedy headstones, the Springfield Cemetery contains a consistent set of graves that carry names from the show's established cast of background characters. And these graves raise questions that comedy alone cannot resolve, because some of them show dates that are impossible. Some of them show names belonging to characters who are alive in the same episodes in which their graves are visible, and some of them show names that belong to no character who has ever appeared on screen. The category of impossible dates is perhaps the most straightforwardly strange. There are at least 3 gravestones in the Springfield Cemetery that bear death dates in the future relative to when the episode containing them aired. A gravestone reading "Beloved Springfield resident with a death year" listed as several years after the episode's broadcast. At the time of broadcast, this date was simply in the future. It was played, if it was played at all, as a production error or a gag. But as the show has continued airing, those future dates have begun to become past dates. The future has caught up to the cemetery, and Springfield's graveyard has been quietly waiting for it. Whether the writers intended this, whether they were planting dates that they knew would eventually seem significant once enough real-world time had passed, is unknowable without inside information. But the pattern is consistent across multiple gravestones, and it suggests at minimum that someone on the production team was thinking about the long game. Was thinking about what the cemetery would look like in 20 years? When viewers return to these episodes on streaming platforms and notice that the future had arrived? The category of living characters with visible graves is more immediately disorienting. The most famous example involves a grave bearing a name that corresponds exactly to a background character who appears in episodes both before and after the episode in which the grave appears. The character dies in no episode. The character's death is never referenced in dialogue. The character simply continues to exist in the world of the show while their headstone sits in the Springfield cemetery with a date on it. The most generous interpretation is that this is a production error, an animator used the wrong name, or a reference was misapplied, or nobody caught the mistake in review. But it has happened more than once, with more than one character, and the cases are specific enough that the error explanation starts to feel insufficient. The darker interpretation, consistent with the radiation theory, is that Springfield's population has a complicated relationship with death that the show has never made fully explicit. A town where people can die and continue to appear, where gravestones and living people can coexist without apparent contradiction, where death is one of many things that Springfield has collectively agreed not to take entirely seriously, because taking it seriously would mean confronting all the other deaths that should have happened and did not, and all the things that caused them. The category of unidentified graves, graves bearing names that correspond to no character who has ever appeared on screen, is the largest category and the most interesting. The Springfield Cemetery is full of people we have never met. And because this is The Simpsons, because the show has always rewarded close reading, it is reasonable to wonder whether those unknown graves represent something more than random filler names. Some of them appear to be related. There are clusters of graves with shared surnames that do not belong to any known Springfield family groups of 2 and 3 headstones in close proximity, arranged the way family plots are arranged, suggesting that the cemetery contains the histories of Springfield families that the show has never followed into the present. These are the people who built the town before the Simpsons arrived. These are the Conovers who ran the dry goods store in 1891. These are the people whose names are on the war memorial. The cemetery is the filing cabinet of Springfield's deep history, and most of the files have never been opened. Among the unidentified graves, there is one that has attracted sustained and serious attention from the fandom over the years. It is a gravestone that appears in at least 6 separate episodes across 4 different seasons, always in roughly the same position within the cemetery, always clearly rendered enough to read, and it bears a name, a date, and an epitaph that do not follow the conventions of either the comedy headstones or the straightforward background fill headstones. The name is not a pun. The date is historically specific in a way that seems intentional rather than incidental. And the epitaph, 4 words long, is a phrase that does not have an obvious comedic reading but does have an obvious thematic one, relating to the nature of knowledge, of secrets kept and secrets revealed, of the difference between what a person knows and what a person chooses to say. The fandom has debated whether this gravestone is a self-referential comment by the show's writers on the show's own tendency toward buried secrets, or whether it references a specific real-world person or event, or whether it is simply an unusually well-crafted background detail that means exactly as much as it appears to mean and no more. The show has never addressed it. The gravestone sits in its corner of the cemetery across 6 episodes and 4 seasons, and says its 4 words to anyone who happens to pause the video at the right moment. And those 4 words are enough to make you wonder whether someone who was not being paid to think about the long-term implications of a background prop was, in fact, thinking about the long-term implications of a background prop. The Halloween episodes, the Treehouse of Horror installments, use the Springfield Cemetery as an active location far more than the regular episodes do, and the cemetery in these episodes behaves differently from how it behaves in the main canon. The gravestones are different. The names on them are different. Some are jokes, some are references to horror films and horror literature, and some are something else entirely. In Treehouse of Horror episodes specifically, the Springfield Cemetery has repeatedly shown a gravestone that reads Isidore Simpson. No character named Isidore Simpson has ever appeared in the show. The Simpson family tree, as established across the main canon episodes, does not include an Isidore, but the name appears. It appears specifically in the Halloween episodes, which are understood to be outside the show's main canon events that happened in the Treehouse of Horror. Episodes are not considered to have happened in the regular show's reality. So a gravestone that appears only in the Halloween episodes could be read as existing only in a version of Springfield that is explicitly marked as non-canonical. A version of Springfield where different rules apply, where people can have died who have not died in the main reality, where the Simpson family history can contain names and people that the main timeline has excised or forgotten. Or it could be a joke. The Treehouse of Horror Cemetery also contains, across its various appearances, gravestones that read as a comprehensive bibliography of American horror fiction. Writers who are buried in the Springfield Halloween Cemetery include figures from the Gothic tradition, from pulp horror, from literary horror, from horror film. Some of these are obvious references that the show's writers would certainly have intended. Others are specific enough that they suggest someone on the writing or art team had a genuinely deep knowledge of horror literature and wanted to pay quiet tribute to it in a space that most viewers would never examine closely. Among the literary gravestones, there is at least one that references a specific horror novel by name, not the author, but the novel itself in an epitaph. A gravestone that bears a phrase that is not the name of a real person but is instead the title of a book, rendered as if it were a name, suggesting that in Springfield's Halloween Cemetery, fictional characters can be buried. Fictional narratives can die. Stories can be interred in consecrated ground and left with markers that tell you what they were called. This is either the most elaborate literary joke the show has ever attempted, or it is something that someone put there for their own reasons and never explained. The regular cemetery, outside the treehouse episodes, also has a section that longtime viewers have come to call the infant section, though the show has never named it as such. A cluster of very small headstones, smaller than the adult headstones, visible in the background of several episodes that use the cemetery as a location. These small headstones do not have legible names in any broadcast version of the show. They are too small and too peripheral to read under standard viewing conditions. But they exist. They have always existed. A row of small graves in the Springfield Cemetery, present in the background, unnamed and unexplained. In a show that has repeatedly and explicitly touched on the theme of Springfield's environmental contamination, on the question of what a generation of radioactive water and irradiated air does to human biology, on the mortality of a population living downwind of one of the most dangerous fictional nuclear facilities ever depicted on television, a section of small graves carries an obvious implied meaning that the show has never been willing to state out loud. It is possible that this reading is wrong. It is possible that the small graves are simply part of the visual texture of a realistic cemetery, because real cemeteries do contain sections for infant burials, and a show as meticulous about background detail as The Simpsons might simply be reflecting that reality without intending any specific narrative meaning. But the show has been willing to imply extraordinary things through background art before. The green sky, the photograph on the mantelpiece, the bottles at Moe's. The infant graves in the Springfield Cemetery exist in the same tradition of background storytelling, and in that tradition, unexplained details are the show's way of communicating what it cannot say through dialogue. The cemetery also contains a monument. Not a headstone, but an actual monument, a carved stone column visible in shots that show the cemetery from a distance, positioned near the main gates in a way that suggests it is the cemetery's central landmark, rather than a marker for any individual grave. The monument is legible in high definition but not in standard definition, which means most viewers have never read what it says. What it says is a date and a phrase. The date is not a death date. It is a founding date, or appears to be a founding date, structured in the way that founding dates are typically formatted on historical markers. And the phrase engraved below the date is a Latin motto that translates, roughly, as something in the vicinity of, "What is held here does not pass from this place." A cemetery motto about the things contained within the cemetery not being able to leave is, on one level, simply a somber monument inscription in the tradition of memorial Latin. On another level, in a town where characters die in one episode and appear in the next, where consequences do not stick, where the past keeps being rewritten, where the official story is always available for revision by whoever currently holds enough power to revise it, a motto about things being held in place and prevented from passing takes on a complicated resonance. Springfield's dead do not stay buried, in any sense. Not in the narrative logic of the show, not in the memory of the town, not in the theories that fans have spent years building. The Springfield Cemetery is full of people who keep coming back, and it has a monument at its gate that says, in Latin, that nothing contained here passes on. Whether that is comfort or warning depends entirely on who is reading it. Outside the cemetery gates, in the section of Springfield immediately adjacent to the graveyard, the background art of several episodes reveals something that no episode has ever addressed directly: a house. Not a character's house, not a recognizable address, a house that sits next to the cemetery in the background of multiple episodes and that, across those episodes, appears to be in a different state of occupancy. In some episodes, the windows are dark. In some episodes, there is a light in one of the upstairs windows. In at least one episode, there is a figure visible in that upstairs window, a small figure, too small and too peripheral to identify, but present. Standing at the window, looking out at the cemetery. Who lives in the house next to the Springfield cemetery? The show has never said. The house exists, the light sometimes appears, the figure sometimes stands at the window, and then the camera moves on, to the foreground action, to the characters and the plot and the story the episode is actually about, and the house stays in the background, doing what background art in Springfield always does, holding something that the show is not ready to say out loud. Number. Section 4. The Chalkboard Gag Conspiracy. Bart Simpson has been writing on a chalkboard for 36 years. The chalkboard gag, a staple of the show's opening title sequence since the first episode, works like this. Bart stands at a school chalkboard, writing the same phrase over and over, filling the board with repetition in the tradition of the classic school punishment. The phrase changes every episode. The repetition is the same. The episode is not about what Bart is writing. Bart stops writing, the bell rings, and the story begins. The chalkboard gag is not plot, it is atmosphere. Except, across 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, if you treat the chalkboard gags not as individual jokes but as a continuous text, a very long, very strange document written by a 10-year-old boy on a school chalkboard, over 3.5 decades, patterns emerge that suggest the chalkboard is doing more than delivering one-liners. The chalkboard gag is, on its surface, a satirical take on school punishment. The joke is that the punishment, writing the same thing repeatedly until the lesson is presumably absorbed, is absurd, and that Bart, being Bart, is being punished for things that are themselves absurd. Writing "I will not eat things for money" suggests a specific prior incident. Writing "I am not a dentist" suggests another. The gags work as comedy precisely because they imply story-specific, anarchic, Bart-shaped incidents that the show never shows us but makes us imagine. But the chalkboard gags also, over time, reveal something about the show's relationship with its own continuity and with the passage of real-world time. Because the chalkboard gags have changed in character across the show's run in ways that mirror the show's broader evolution, and those changes have been noticed, documented, and debated by the fandom in ways that the production team has never fully addressed. In the early seasons 1 through roughly 8, the chalkboard gags tend to be short, punchy, and purely comedic. They are one-liners that work in isolation. 5 days is not a school week. The principal's name is not Butthead. My homework was not stolen by a one-armed man. They are jokes about Bart being Bart, written in Bart's voice, delivering Bart's particular flavor of chaos in a concentrated dose before the episode begins. In the middle seasons 9 through about 16, the chalkboard gags start to change. They become longer. They become more self-aware. They begin to reference the show itself rather than Bart's fictional misdeeds. I will not mess with the opening credits. This show does not exist only in clip show form. I am not authorized to fire substitute teachers. These gags are still funny, but they are funny in a different register. They are meta-jokes, jokes about the show's own production and reception, jokes that require the viewer to know things about The Simpsons as a cultural object rather than things about Bart Simpson as a character. This shift is significant. In the early seasons, the chalkboard gag is Bart speaking to us from inside the fiction. In the middle seasons, the chalkboard gag is the show speaking to us from outside it. The voice changes, the address changes, and the change happens gradually enough that most viewers absorb it without noticing. In the later seasons, 17 onward, the chalkboard gags take a third form. They become topical. They reference real-world events, news stories, cultural moments happening in the week the episode airs. Even I know that this debt ceiling thing is ridiculous. I will not celebrate meaningless milestones. These gags break the fiction entirely. They are not Bart's punishment for a fictional incident, and they are not the show commenting on its own production. They are a cartoon character being used as a vehicle for timely social commentary, delivered before the episode even begins. 3 distinct phases, 3 distinct voices, 3 distinct relationships between the show and the world. And what is interesting is that the transition between each phase happened at a time when the show was also transitioning in other ways, when the production team changed, when the cultural context changed, when the show's relationship with its own mythology shifted. The chalkboard is a timeline. It marks the show's evolution in real time, in compressed form, in a sequence of repeated phrases that most people watch for the joke and then forget. Now let us go deeper. Because within the full corpus of chalkboard gags, there are specific entries that do not function as jokes in any conventional sense. Gags that are too specific, too strange, too semantically loaded to read as pure comedy. There is a chalkboard gag from the middle seasons that reads, "There is no such thing as a free lunch except at the Krusty Burger Tuesday promotional." This works as a joke. It is a setup with an absurdly mundane punchline, a philosophical statement undercut by a specific fast food detail. But the Krusty Burger Tuesday promotional is a real thing within the show's universe, a recurring detail mentioned in several episodes, and reading the gag as purely comedic requires you to ignore the fact that it is also making a claim about economic reality within Springfield. There are free lunches in Springfield. They exist. The philosophical statement that opens the joke is false within the show's world. Bart, a 10-year-old boy, knows this. He is writing on the chalkboard a philosophical claim he knows to be false, and the falseness of the claim is the joke. But it is also the show quietly noting that classical economic assumptions do not apply in Springfield, that the rules of scarcity and trade-off that govern the real world are different in a town where a promotional at a fast food chain can disprove a fundamental economic principle. There is a chalkboard gag that reads, "I will not defame New Guinea." This is funny because it is random, because the specificity of New Guinea as a target of potential defamation is absurd. But it also raises an obvious question. What happened? What did Bart do that would constitute defaming a sovereign nation? The show never tells us. But the gag exists as a compressed story. There was an incident involving Bart, it had international diplomatic implications, and the school's response was to make him write about it on a chalkboard. The chalkboard gag is the only visible remnant of an episode that was never made. The show has done this repeatedly. Chalkboard gags that imply prior incidents so specific that they must have been drawn from fully realized story ideas. Incidents with enough detail to suggest that someone on the writing staff developed a story, decided not to produce it as a full episode, and instead left the trace of it in the chalkboard gag. These are the fossils of unproduced Simpsons episodes, preserved in 30-second title sequences that most viewers stop watching after season 5. There is a chalkboard gag that reads, "I did not invent Irish dancing." This is funny, but it also implies that someone accused Bart of inventing Irish dancing, which implies a sequence of events in which Bart did something that led a responsible adult to believe he had invented Irish dancing, which implies a story. There is a chalkboard gag that reads, "I will not yell, she's dead during roll call." Who is she? Why was Bart yelling about her? Why during roll call specifically? The gag functions as comedy precisely because it withholds the context that would explain it. It gives you the punishment and removes the crime, and what remains is funnier than any explanation could be. But it is also a story with a missing middle. Someone in Bart's orbit died, or appeared to have died, or Bart told people someone had died as a prank, and the story of how that happened and what its consequences were exists somewhere in the writing staff's collective memory and nowhere on screen. The chalkboard gags also serve as a kind of counter-archive to the show's official history. The official episode order, the official canon, the official list of what happened in Springfield, these are the primary texts. The chalkboard gags are the annotations, the marginalia, the things someone wrote in the spaces between the official text. And like all good marginalia, they sometimes tell you more about the book than the book does. There are at least 4 chalkboard gags that directly contradict established canon from earlier episodes. Statements that Bart writes as if they represent lessons he has learned, but that conflict with things the show has previously established as true within its fictional world. A gag that says the opposite of what a specific earlier episode confirmed. A gag that asserts that a specific thing cannot happen when a specific earlier episode showed it happening. These contradictions are either production errors, the writers not catching an inconsistency between current and past seasons, or they are the floating timeline at work. The present keeps revising the past in Springfield, and the chalkboard, like the flashback episodes that give Homer and Marge different courtship stories, depending on when they air, is one of the surfaces on which the revision is visible. The single most analyzed chalkboard gag in the show's history, in terms of fan attention and theoretical interpretation, is one that appeared in a later season episode and reads, "Some things are better left in the background." This is a meta gag. It is funny. But it is also an exact description of the show's own philosophy toward its hidden content, its Easter eggs, its background art, its buried storylines. Bart is writing on the chalkboard that some things are better left in the background, which is itself something that appears in the background of the episode, which is itself a show that has always kept its most interesting content in the background. The gag is self-describing, self-referential, and self-aware in a way that breaks through the comedy register entirely and becomes something closer to a statement of artistic philosophy. Whether the writer responsible for that gag intended this level of meaning or wrote it as a joke and did not fully register its implications within the show's broader context is impossible to say. But the gag is there, and it says what it says. Among the chalkboard gags that have generated the most sustained analytical attention, there is one category that stands apart from all the others, and that is the category of chalkboard gags that were changed between their original broadcast and their subsequent syndication and streaming releases. Most viewers assume that the version of an episode they watch on a streaming platform is identical to the version that originally aired on television. For The Simpsons, this is not always true, and the reasons for specific changes are not always explained. Some of these changes are well-documented music licensing issues that require the replacement of specific songs, for example, or content that was altered because its context had been changed by real-world events that postdated the original broadcast. But among the changes that have no obvious practical explanation, several involve the chalkboard gag. Episodes in which the chalkboard gag has been altered between original broadcast and streaming release, with a different phrase substituted for the original, without explanation. The original phrases have been reconstructed in some cases from recordings of the original broadcasts, and in at least 2 instances, the original chalkboard gag was more specific, more pointed, more explicitly referential to real-world events or people than the replacement. The replacement gags are blander. They are funny in a more generic way. They contain nothing that would make anyone uncomfortable or require explanation. Someone chose to change those chalkboard gags. Someone looked at the original broadcast version and decided that what Bart had written needed to be rewritten. And the show, which is about a town that collectively votes to rewrite its own history, about a family that keeps having its origin story revised, about a population that has made an art form of choosing comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. This show quietly rewrote its chalkboard gags and never said why. The chalkboard is a document. It has been accumulating for 36 years. It says things that are funny, things that imply unproduced stories, things that contradict the show's own canon, things that describe the show's own philosophical approach to hidden content. It says things that were later changed by someone who did not want them on record. It is the longest-running single document in the history of animated television, and most viewers stopped reading it in 1993. Number. Section 5. Guest stars and their hidden connections to the plot. The Simpsons has always used celebrity guest appearances differently from other shows. Most television programs that feature celebrities do so straightforwardly. A famous person plays a version of themselves, interacts with the regular cast, provides a boost of cultural cachet, and departs. The celebrity is a destination. The show takes you to them and brings you back. The Simpsons uses celebrity guests as information. The guests are not destinations, they are clues. This requires some explanation, because on the surface, the show's celebrity appearances follow the same general template as any other shows. A famous person appears, often as a version of themselves, interacts with the Simpsons family, says memorable things, and departs. The individual appearances are funny. Many of them are iconic. The show has a long and celebrated history of convincing major cultural figures to participate in its particular brand of self-aware comedy. But underneath the surface of many of these appearances, not all of them, but enough to constitute a pattern, there is a layer of information that the celebrity's presence is communicating about the episode's theme, about the show's mythology, about the specific episode's place within the larger Springfield narrative. The celebrity is not just a guest. The celebrity is a symbol. And the symbol, if you know what to look for, tells you things about the episode that the episode does not tell you directly. Let us begin with the most famous guest appearance in the show's history, not because it is the most hidden, but because it is the one where the symbolic layer is most clearly visible once you know to look for it. Michael Jackson, Season 3, Stark Raving Dad. Jackson appeared uncredited, voicing a large white man named Leon Kompowski, who claimed to be Michael Jackson. The episode was about Homer being sent to a mental institution and befriending a man who believed or claimed to believe that he was the most famous pop star in the world. The man sang like Michael Jackson. He moved like Michael Jackson. He had all of Jackson's musical knowledge. But when Homer introduced him to his family, there was visible uncertainty in the Simpsons household about whether this was really Michael Jackson or simply a man who believed he was. The episode resolved this ambiguity with characteristic ambiguity. By the end, Leon Kompowski had helped Bart write and perform a birthday song for Lisa, demonstrating genuine creative capacity and emotional intelligence. And then he walked away and admitted that he was just a man who had found that claiming to be Michael Jackson helped him connect with people. He was not Michael Jackson. He had never been Michael Jackson. He was someone who had borrowed Michael Jackson's identity and used it to do genuine good in the world. The real Michael Jackson's guest appearance was therefore in service of an episode about borrowed identity, about the question of whether the person matters or whether the thing the person does is what matters, about whether being genuinely kind and helpful has the same value when it is performed through an assumed persona rather than expressed as an authentic self. The most famous person in the world appeared on the show, and the episode's argument was, "It does not matter who you really are if the thing you do is real." That is a deeply strange argument for a show to make using Michael Jackson as its vehicle. And it becomes stranger when you consider that Jackson appeared uncredited, that the show actively obscured his participation, and that the episode itself is about the difficulty of confirming whether someone is who they say they are. The meta level of the appearance is as layered as the episode itself. Compare this to the appearance of Stephen Hawking, who appeared in multiple episodes across the show's history. Hawking is the most straightforward case of a celebrity guest whose presence functions as symbol rather than simply spectacle. Hawking is, by any measure, the living embodiment of the show's central dichotomy, a mind of extraordinary power housed in a body of extraordinary limitation. He is intellect severed from physical capacity. He is consciousness operating at a level far above what any biological container should be able to sustain. This is the dichotomy that The Simpsons explores, in one form or another, in almost every episode. Homer's brilliant mind made inaccessible by brain damage and physical comedy. Maggie's extraordinary intelligence trapped in an infant body. Burns's razor-sharp strategic thinking kept alive only through extraordinary medical intervention. Mensa-level Lisa in a town that punishes intelligence. The Simpsons has always been interested in the gap between what a mind can do and what a life will allow it to do. Hawking's presence in the show is the purest possible expression of that interest, rendered as a person rather than a metaphor. Each of Hawking's appearances in the show tends to come at moments when the episode is grappling most directly with questions about intelligence, about the nature of genius, about what it means to be exceptional in a world that is not designed for exceptional people. He does not appear in episodes about Homer falling down. He appears in episodes about Lisa trying to find her people, about the tension between what someone is capable of and what the world around them will accommodate. His presence is the show's way of pointing at its own central theme with the most precise instrument available. The Rolling Stones episode You Only Move Twice from Season 8, though the Stones were featured in a different episode and the appearance of various rock musicians across the show's history follow a similar pattern. Musicians tend to appear in Springfield at moments of cultural transition episodes about Springfield's relationship with popular culture, about the gap between what the town aspires to and what it actually is, about the way authentic creative expression survives or fails to survive in an environment optimized for mediocrity. The musicians are not just famous people. They are representatives of a world that exists outside Springfield's contamination zone. They arrive from outside, they interact with the town, and they leave, and the difference between how they look and how the Springfield residents look, the difference in visual rendering that the show uses to distinguish outsiders from locals, is at its most pronounced in these episodes. The celebrity as outsider visual language is one of the show's most consistent and least discussed stylistic choices. Guest characters, people from outside Springfield, are consistently drawn with more realistic proportions than the residents. Their eyes are closer to normal human scale. Their overbites are less pronounced. Their physical comedy takes a different form. They look, in the visual grammar of the show, like visitors to a place where the air is thicker, where the physics are slightly different, where biology has been nudged in a specific direction by exposure to something in the environment. The contrast is most visible in episodes where a celebrity guest is placed in direct physical proximity to Homer or Marge or another Springfield regular. The proportions that read as normal in isolation, 4 fingers, yellow skin, large eyes, become legible as abnormal when placed next to someone who has not been living in Springfield. The guest's more realistic rendering highlights, by contrast, how far from realistic the residents have drifted. This is the radiation theory, visible in the show's own visual style, built into the character design at a level that operates below conscious perception. Michael Jordan's appearance round Springfield, Season 6, uses this contrast at its most emotionally effective. Jordan is rendered with his real height relative to the other characters, which makes him physically imposing in a way that Springfield residents never are. But more than that, he is drawn with a fluency and specificity of movement that the regular animation does not typically achieve. His appearance is a demonstration of physical excellence that the show's visual style does not usually have the vocabulary to express. And he appears in an episode about Lisa losing her beloved mentor, about grief, about the way music can hold the memory of someone who is gone. Jordan's appearance is about the possibility of greatness, about what it means to be extraordinary in a world that is not designed for extraordinary people, which is, once again, the show's central preoccupation, delivered through the most precisely chosen possible vessel. The guest appearances that have generated the most sustained fan analysis over the years are not the most famous ones. They are the ones that seem to contradict the episode's surface narrative appearances, where the celebrity's presence makes a claim that the episode's dialogue does not make, where the choice of this particular famous person for this particular episode seems too specific to be accidental. The appearance of Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger in the episode about Springfield's relationship with Hollywood, which was itself an episode about the gap between the version of a place that famous people see and the version that the people who live there experience, contained a visual gag, visible only in the background of one shot, in which a placard on the wall of the home in which the celebrities are staying lists a set of rules for guests that includes, in small text at the bottom, a reference to something that has no comedic explanation within the episode, and that appears to reference a specific, real-world contractual dispute that was ongoing between the actors and their studio at the time of filming. Whether this was placed deliberately as a reference to the real-world situation, or whether it is an extraordinary coincidence, or whether someone on the production team was aware of the situation and decided to reference it in the smallest possible way, has never been established. But the pattern is consistent enough across enough guest appearances that it is worth naming as a pattern. The Simpsons uses its celebrity guests as information. The choice of guest is a clue. The treatment of the guest, how they are rendered, where in Springfield they appear, what their interaction with the main characters consists of, is commentary. The guest appearances are not the show's vacation from its themes. They are one of the primary vehicles through which the show's themes are delivered. The celebrity who has appeared most often in the show, across the most episodes, is also the celebrity whose appearances are hardest to read as anything other than simple participation. Tom Hanks's appearances in the Simpsons universe, including the movie, where his cameo is one of the most structurally important pieces of the film's narrative, follow a different pattern from the pattern described above. Hanks does not appear as a symbol, he appears as a guarantor. His presence in the show's universe is the show's way of saying, the thing you are watching is legitimate. Hanks's specific cultural status, his reputation as the most trusted, most wholesome, most reliably decent public figure in American popular culture, means that his appearance functions as an endorsement of Springfield's reality. The government uses Hanks in the film to sell Springfield's destruction to the American public as a reasonable, decent, trustworthy policy. And Springfield buys it, because Tom Hanks said it was okay. The appearance of the most trusted person in American culture is being used to illustrate the mechanism by which ordinary people are persuaded to accept extraordinary things. The celebrity is not an endorsement of the show. The celebrity is a critique of what celebrity endorsements do to our capacity for critical thinking. That is not a simple joke. That is an argument. Number. Section 6. The recurring stranger's background. Characters with secret lives. Every television show has background characters. Extras who populate the world, making it feel inhabited, giving the main characters somewhere to exist. Most of the time, these characters are interchangeable. They fill space. They are not meant to be noticed individually. The Simpsons made a choice, early in its run, that most animation productions do not make. It gave its background characters names, and then it gave them consistent personalities, and then it gave them recurring storylines. And then it started hiding those storylines in the margins of the main action, developing them across seasons and episodes through a series of visual details and background interactions that the show's main narrative never acknowledged. The background characters of Springfield are not extras. They are a parallel cast, and they have been living their own version of the show for 36 years in the spaces where the camera is not pointed. We will start with the obvious, and then move toward the hidden. The most famous background character in the show's history, the one who has generated the most sustained fan attention, the most analysis, the most theory, is a character who has never been named in any episode of the show. You know who this is. The character is an elderly man, small, stooped, with enormous glasses and a permanent expression of mild confusion. He appears in the background of Springfield scenes at a rate that, over 36 seasons, adds up to something in the range of hundreds of episodes. And in many of those episodes, he dies. This character, whom the fandom calls Hans Moleman, has been discussed in other contexts. But the focus here is not on his deaths, which are well documented, well analyzed, and as strange as anything in the show's mythology, but on the things he does between his deaths. Because while the deaths are what the fandom tends to focus on, the life is where the hidden content lives. Between deaths, Hans Moleman has a life. A specific, detailed, sometimes heartbreaking life that has been revealed in fragments across 36 seasons, never directly addressed, assembled from background shots and passing references and moments that the main narrative zooms past without stopping. Hans Moleman makes films. This has been established directly in the episode where the Springfield Film Festival is held. Moleman submits a film called Man Getting Hit by Football, which is exactly what its title describes, and which wins the festival's audience award. This moment is played as a joke, and it is a very good joke. But it is also, for anyone paying attention, a piece of information about who Hans Moleman is. He makes films, he thinks about what he sees, he is, in his tiny stooped way, an artist. This reading is supported by background details across multiple episodes in which Moleman is visible with camera equipment, or in proximity to what appears to be a viewfinder or lens, in contexts that have nothing to do with the film festival. He carries equipment, he sets up shots. He is, in the margins of Springfield's main action, a filmmaker who is always working, always observing, always preparing to capture something. In one episode, visible only in a background shot that lasts approximately 2 seconds, Moleman is seen handing a piece of paper to another background character. The paper, legible in high definition but not in standard definition, appears to be a screenplay. Whether it is a screenplay for the same kind of minimalist cinema he submitted to the film festival, or something more ambitious, or something that corresponds to any of the other moments in which Moleman appears to be engaged in creative work, is impossible to determine. But it is there. Hans Moleman, between his deaths, is writing screenplays. The background character whose secret life is the most systematically developed across the show's history is not Moleman, however. It is a character who has a name. He appears with a name in enough episodes to be positively identified, but whose storyline is so entirely contained in the background that many regular viewers are unaware it exists. His name is Sideshow Bob. We are joking. Sideshow Bob is not a background character. He is a major recurring antagonist who has his own episode arc. The character we are actually discussing is named Database, a student at Springfield Elementary who appears in background shots of school scenes across many seasons. Database is a very tall, very thin boy with enormous glasses and an air of quiet remove. He is a member of the school's nerd clique, established in the episode that introduces the Springfield Elementary class hierarchy. And across the seasons, in background shots of school scenes, Database's position within the social world of the school changes in ways that the show never comments on. In early appearances, Database is consistently positioned with the other nerds, a clear, identifiable social grouping, separated from the popular kids, separated from the outcasts, occupying a specific corner of the school's social geography. In later appearances, the grouping starts to shift. Database appears in proximity to different characters. His physical positioning in group shots, something the show's layout artists would have thought about consciously, choosing where to place background characters in relation to each other, gradually changes. By the late middle seasons, Database is no longer consistently placed with the nerd cluster. He appears in some shots adjacent to the popular kids, in some shots isolated entirely. In some shots, in positions that suggest a social trajectory that the show has never explained. What happened to database? The show never says. But the background art tracks a social story across years of production, a story about a specific child's movement through the social ecosystem of a school, told entirely in the visual language of who stands next to whom. The townspeople who gather in the background of Springfield's public spaces, the crowds that form at town meetings, at church, at the stadium, at Moe's have their own consistent internal logic that rewards study, because the crowd compositions are not random. The same groups of characters consistently appear in the same proximity to each other, forming stable social clusters that persist across episodes and seasons. And within those stable clusters, things change. The cluster that forms around the area of Moe's Tavern in background crowd shots, the group that tends to position itself near Barney Gumble, near Homer's regular barstool, near the front window of the tavern, changes composition across the show's run in ways that correspond, roughly, with the main cast storylines involving Moe's. When Homer's friendship with Moe is at its warmest in the main narrative, the background crowd around the tavern tends to be larger, more cohesive, more socially animated. When the main narrative involves conflict or estrangement within the core Moe's group, the background crowd thins, separates, rearranges itself into smaller clusters that stand at greater distances from each other. The background is tracking the emotional temperature of the main narrative in the social geography of the crowd. The background artist who arranges these figures is doing, in the visual language of who stands near whom, what the main narrative does in dialogue and plot. Among the recurring background characters, there is one whose trajectory is the most explicitly mysterious and the least explained. This character appears first in a very early season, positioned in what appears to be a professional context, wearing clothing that suggests a specific vocation, carrying equipment that suggests a specific kind of work. The character reappears across subsequent seasons, and the clothing and equipment change, not gradually abruptly. The vocation shifts. The professional context shifts. The character is recognizably the same character, same face, same approximate age, same visual design, but appears to be a different kind of person in each cluster of appearances. The fandom has proposed various explanations: career changes, a witness protection situation, given the abrupt nature of the shifts, the floating timeline rewriting the character's background, the way it rewrites Homer and Marge's courtship, with each rewrite assigning a different professional history to the same face, or simply a production inconsistency, different background artists, referencing different model sheets and producing inconsistent results that nobody caught in continuity review. Any of these could be true. The show has never commented on this character specifically, but the consistency of the character's face across the inconsistency of the character's context creates a puzzle that simple production error does not fully explain. Faces in animation are not accidents. You do not accidentally reproduce the same face, at the same scale, in the same visual style, in multiple episodes across multiple seasons. Someone put this person in Springfield, and someone kept putting them back, and someone gave them a different life each time. The most recent category of background character secret life, and the one that has been most actively discussed in the fandom in the era of streaming and high-definition viewing, involves background characters whose activities, when watched in isolation, stripped of the foreground action that was supposed to draw your attention away, tell complete stories in real time. In other words, background characters who are doing things that take time, who begin an activity at the start of a long shot and complete it by the end of that same shot, whose actions have a beginning, a middle, and an end, visible only to the person watching the background instead of the foreground. There is a background sequence in an episode where the main action involves Homer in the middle of the Springfield town square, in which a background character begins the shot on one side of the square and, over the course of the shot, which lasts approximately 45 seconds of screen time, walks across the square, stops to interact briefly with another background character, exchanges something that appears to be a small object, and departs through a side street. The interaction is too specific to be accidental movement animation. Someone wrote it, someone animated it, and it tells a complete small story, a transaction, a meeting, a departure in the background of a scene that is officially about something entirely different. What was exchanged? Who were those characters? The show has never said, but someone spent the time to animate a complete narrative arc in a location where nobody was supposed to be looking, and they did it with enough specificity that it reads as intentional, rather than as the product of ambient animation filling dead screen space. This is the background character tradition at its most evolved. Not simply figures that populate the world, not simply visual jokes delivered in the margins, but complete characters living complete moments in the spaces between the moments that the show officially cares about. Springfield is not populated by the main cast. It is populated by dozens of people with their own lives, their own trajectories, their own stories, and the show has been telling those stories quietly in the background for 36 years. Number, Section 7. The numbers hidden inside every episode. Numbers are everywhere in The Simpsons. This is not surprising. Numbers are everywhere in life. Addresses, prices, dates, ages, measurements, the fabric of daily existence is woven through with quantities, and a show as committed to background detail as The Simpsons would naturally incorporate those quantities into its visual texture. What is surprising is the consistency, and what that consistency adds up to. The Simpsons has been using a specific set of recurring numbers since its earliest seasons. These numbers appear in addresses, in phone numbers, in prices, in countdown timers, in episode codes, in the digital displays of various Springfield devices, in the background signage we have already discussed. They are not always the same number. The show is not doing something as simple as hiding a single magic number in every episode, but they cluster. Certain numbers appear with a frequency that cannot be explained by random distribution. Certain combinations of numbers recur across decades and dozens of episodes in contexts so varied that coincidence starts to feel insufficient. The most well-documented of these recurring numbers is, of course, 742, The Simpsons' house number, 742 Evergreen Terrace. This is the address of the family's home, and it appears where you would expect it to appear, on the house itself, in mail, in addresses used by other characters when referring to the family. These appearances are not the interesting ones. The interesting appearances are the ones where 742 appears somewhere it has no obvious narrative reason to appear. The number 742 appears, across the show's history, in the background of scenes set in locations far from Evergreen Terrace in the Springfield nuclear power plant, where a display panel in a background shot has shown a reading of 742 in various units. In the hospital, where a background display in a waiting room shot has shown 742 in a context that suggests it is a room number or a patient number rather than an address. In Moe's Tavern, where the lottery ticket visible in one background shot has 742 as part of its number sequence. In the Springfield Elementary Library, where a shelf label visible in a background shot when Bart is sent to return books shows a Dewey Decimal-style classification that begins with 742. None of these appearances are functionally significant. None of them affect any plot. They are purely background details, but their recurrence across so many different locations and contexts suggests that someone involved in the show's production, or many someones, across many production seasons has been placing this number in backgrounds as a consistent practice. Whether it began as a specific Easter egg that was then perpetuated by artists who knew to continue it, or whether it was something one person started doing and others discovered and replicated without coordination, its persistence is remarkable. The number that appears with the second highest frequency, after 742, is one that most viewers would not expect. It is not a round number. It is not a culturally loaded number. It is 108, and it appears in contexts that span the full length of the show's run, in configurations that go beyond simple address repetition and into something more structurally embedded. 108 appears most visibly in connection with the Springfield nuclear power plant. The plant has 342 safety violations, a number that the show has stated explicitly in at least one episode, and that has become part of the show's canonical mythology. 342 is 108 times. Something that is not quite 3, it is 3.166, repeating times 108, close to a multiple, but not quite. The relationship between 342 and 108 is the relationship between almost and exactly, which is also the relationship between the Springfield nuclear power plant and actual safety, and between Springfield and normal, and between the show's surface comedy and the darker material it keeps almost but not quite saying directly. Whether this relationship is intentional Whether someone on the writing staff or production team thought about the numerical relationship between the plant's violation count and the recurring background number is impossible to confirm. But the numbers are there, and the relationship between them is there, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. 108 also appears in the duration of several of the show's most significant episodes. Not the total runtime, which is standardized for broadcast television, but specific internal timings, the duration of specific sequences, the number of seconds between specific events within an episode, the moment in the episode's runtime at which a specific piece of information is revealed. These are not the kind of timings that most viewers ever measure, and they are the kind of timings that could easily be coincidental. Episode production is not a process in which the exact second of a specific revelation is planned in advance. But enough of the significant revelations, the Burns shooting answer, the Lisa's future flash forward, the Mona Simpson reunion fall at or near the 108-second mark from a significant earlier moment that the coincidence starts to accumulate weight. The number that is hardest to explain through coincidence alone is 24601. This number appears in one episode of The Simpsons, briefly, in a background context that the episode never addresses. 24601 is a famous number. It is the prisoner number of Jean Valjean in Les Miserables. Its appearance in a Simpsons background is not, in isolation, remarkable. The show makes literary references constantly, and a quick nod to Hugo is well within its normal operation. But 24601 appears in a specific context, next to a specific character, in a specific episode that is not about Les Miserables, or justice, or redemption, or any of the themes that number typically evokes. It appears next to a character who has, across the course of the show, been involved in a storyline about a crime committed and not punished, about a debt unpaid, about a man whose history contains something that the show has gestured toward without fully revealing. Is the appearance of 24601 next to this character a reference to that hidden history? Is it the show using a famous literary shorthand for this person has served their time, or this person has not served their time, or simply this person's past contains something that the present has not accounted for? Or is it a background artist's literary joke placed with no particular agenda, meaning no more than any other cultural reference the show weaves into its fabric? The show has not said. The number is there. The character is next to it. The episode is about something else entirely. And the number 24601 is specific enough, famous enough, loaded enough with literary, meaning that its appearance in a particular context invites the reading that someone put it there because they had something to say that they could not say through dialogue. The phone numbers that appear in the show deserve their own discussion, because they are, as a category, the most systematically analyzed set of numbers in the show's history, and the analysis has produced some genuinely remarkable results. A recurring practice in television is to use phone numbers in the format 555, XXXX, a convention established because 555 numbers are reserved in the North American numbering plan and cannot be assigned to real subscribers, preventing viewers from actually calling numbers they see on screen and reaching real people. Most television shows follow this convention without exception. The Simpsons has, on a handful of documented occasions, not followed it. Specific episodes of The Simpsons, particularly from the Golden Era seasons, have shown phone numbers visible in the background, or briefly on screen, in foreground shots that do not follow the 555 convention, and that, when dialed, reach something. Not always the same thing. Not always something expected. The numbers were real. Someone put real phone numbers in a Simpsons episode, and for a period of time after those episodes aired, the numbers connected to things. Some of these have been traced and documented. In one case, the number led to a recording that appeared to be related to the episode's content, a joke that extended beyond the screen, a gag that rewarded the viewer who was paying enough attention to notice the number and curious enough to dial it. In at least one other case, the number led to something that appeared unrelated to the episode, but that, upon examination, connected to a storyline from an earlier season in a way that required knowledge of the show's continuity to appreciate. Whether these were officially sanctioned production decisions, Easter eggs planned and implemented by the writing staff, or the private projects of individual crew members who had access to the production and decided to hide things in it, has never been fully established. The numbers are real. What they connected to was real, for the time that those connections were active. And the practice of hiding real, functional phone numbers in a show that was supposed to be using fictional ones is the kind of detail that, once you know it exists, makes you want to look at every number you have ever seen in a Simpsons episode and wonder whether this one is also real. The ages of characters, as stated in dialogue across the show's run, produce a set of contradictions so extensive and so consistent that they stop looking like continuity errors and start looking like a deliberate refusal to commit to arithmetic. Homer's age has been stated variously as 36, 38, 39, and 40 across different episodes. These contradictions are well documented and usually explained as a consequence of the floating timeline. But the specific numbers chosen are interesting. The ages cluster, they return to the same approximate range, always within a few years of each other, never drifting far from the same narrow band. Whatever Homer's actual age is, whatever the show's intended answer to the question of his age might be, the answer is somewhere in a specific zone that the show keeps circling without landing on. This circling behavior is itself a piece of information. A floating timeline that could place Homer's age anywhere could make him whatever age the current episode's story required consistently returns to the same approximate range. The number is not arbitrary. The range is not wide. Someone cares about where Homer's age lands, and they keep bringing it back to the same territory, even while refusing to pin it to a specific digit. The specific number that appears most frequently when Homer's age is stated not across all the contradictory statements, but in the episodes that handle the question of his age most seriously, most deliberately, in narrative contexts where his age is relevant to the story, rather than a throwaway detail, is 39. Homer is 39. He keeps being 39. He has been 39 in more episodes than he has been any other specific age. And 39 is the age that corresponds, within the show's internal chronology, with the year that a specific event happened, an event that, if you place it at Homer's 39th year and count backward, puts his birth in a year that creates a coherent, if not entirely consistent timeline for his relationship with his parents, his childhood in Springfield, his early adulthood, his employment at the plant. 39 is not random. 39 is the number that makes the show's most important internal dates line up correctly. Whether that is because the writers deliberately chose 39 to make their internal chronology work, or because 39 is simply the age, Homer feels like the age that corresponds emotionally and narratively to the kind of person he is a question about artistic intention rather than arithmetic and cannot be answered from the outside. But the number is there, and it is consistent, and it is doing work. Number, Section 8, Treehouse of Horror, the clues hidden in the horror. Every year, usually in late October, The Simpsons produces a special episode known as Treehouse of Horror. These episodes, which have been a fixture of the show since Season 2, consist of 3 short horror-themed stories, usually parodies of famous horror films or works of fiction, set in a version of Springfield that is explicitly outside the show's main continuity. Things that happen in Treehouse of Horror episodes are not considered to have happened in the regular show. Characters can die. Reality can bend. The rules that apply in a normal Simpsons episode do not apply here. This is the official position. This is what the show tells you about Treehouse of Horror. It is not quite true. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are not simply non-canonical entertainment. They are, when read carefully, a parallel archive, a version of the Springfield mythology that operates by different rules, and in doing so reveals things about the show's main universe that the main universe cannot say directly. The horror context grants the show a license it does not have in its regular episodes, the license to take its darkest premises to their logical conclusions. And in taking those premises to their conclusions, the Treehouse episodes illuminate the structure of the darkness that the regular episodes contain but cannot fully explore. The first thing to understand about Treehouse of Horror is that the horror scenarios the show chooses are not random. Each year's 3 stories are selected from a vast range of possible horror premises, and the specific premises chosen for each episode tend to cluster around the themes that the regular show was engaging with in the same season. The horror is the season's subtext made text. It is the show's anxieties expressed without the cushion of comedy. The first Treehouse of Horror, from Season 2, contained 3 stories. The first was a haunted house story. The second was an alien abduction story. The third was an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, narrated by James Earl Jones. On the surface, these are simply 3 horror scenarios. But read in the context of what the regular Season 2 was doing, establishing the show's mythology, introducing the nuclear plant as a central concern, beginning to develop the Burns character beyond simple one-dimensional villainy. The three stories look different. The haunted house is a house that knows what its inhabitants have done. The alien abduction is a story about beings who observe humanity from a distance and find it fundamentally strange. The Raven is a story about a man losing his mind through grief, about the border between reality and delusion, about a consciousness that keeps repeating the same moment in an endless loop. Season 2 of The Simpsons was about a family establishing itself in a specific place, being observed by forces more powerful than themselves, and beginning to suspect that the reality they inhabit is not quite what it appears. The Treehouse of Horror episodes were making the same argument in horror movie grammar. This thematic correspondence continues across the show's history, and in some seasons it becomes so precise that it reads less like thematic coherence and more like the regular episodes, and the Treehouse episodes were written with explicit reference to each other's content. Season 5's Treehouse of Horror, the fourth installment, contains a story in which Homer sells his soul to the devil in exchange for a donut. The story is a comedic adaptation of Faust-adjacent folktales, and it is funny. But Season 5 of the regular show is the season in which Homer's relationship with Burns is most explicitly explored, the season in which the show most directly engages with the question of what Homer has traded away, in terms of dignity and self-determination and cognitive capacity, in exchange for the stability of his job. He has not traded his literal soul, but the regular season is about the things he has given up, the price he has paid for the life he leads, the question of whether the bargain was ever fair. The Treehouse episode makes the bargain explicit. It names it. It literalizes what the regular season is saying metaphorically. The horror episode in which Homer literally sells his soul to a devil named Ned Flanders, because of course it is Ned, because of course the man next door is the one who takes what Homer gives away, contains a piece of hidden information that is easy to miss because it is positioned as a gag rather than as information. When the devil presents Homer with the contract for his soul, the contract is briefly visible in a medium shot. It is covered in legal text. Most of the legal text is the show's standard comedy legal text, which is to say it is dense and legalistic and refers to clauses and subclauses in a way that sounds plausible and means nothing. But in the lower third of the contract, in text that becomes legible only in high definition, there is a clause that does not follow the comedy legal text pattern. It is specific. It references a specific asset, and that asset is not Homer's soul. It references the nuclear power plant. Whether this is a throwaway joke, the devil obtaining the plant as part of the soul deal, or whether it is the episode's hidden argument that the real transaction in Homer's life, the real bargain that has cost him the most, is the one involving the plant, is a question the episode deliberately leaves unresolved. The text is there, the reference is there, and the regular season surrounding the Treehouse episode is a season in which the plant's role in Homer's life, in Burns's power, in Springfield's contamination, is more explicitly present than it has been in previous seasons. The Treehouse episode put the plant in the devil's contract. The regular season was asking why Homer had never questioned whose interests his job actually served. The Treehouse episodes have also been used across the show's history to address character deaths that the regular show was not willing or able to address. Characters who die in the regular show tend to be secondary characters, guest characters, background characters, characters whose deaths can be contained within a single episode and then mourned and moved past. But in Treehouse of Horror episodes, where the deaths are non-canonical, the main cast can die, and they do, repeatedly, in ways that the show executes with more emotional precision than pure horror parody would require. The deaths of major characters in Treehouse of Horror episodes tend to be more emotionally resonant than the horror genre requires. A horror parody does not need the character's death to mean something beyond its function in the horror narrative. But The Simpsons' Treehouse deaths often mean something. They often stage the deaths in ways that illuminate something about the characters that the regular show cannot access, that strip away the comedy and show you what is underneath. Homer's deaths in Treehouse episodes tend to involve the recognition, at the moment of death, of something he has been avoiding. A horror story in which Homer dies, and the mechanism of his death is directly connected to a choice he made, a compromise he accepted, a thing he chose not to look at. These deaths are the regular show's avoided reckonings given form. He dies for the reasons the regular show would not let him die for. The treehouse episode gives his negligence its consequences, temporarily, in a space where consequences are permissible. Lisa's deaths tend to be different in character. They tend to involve being right about something that nobody listened to, and being killed because nobody listened. The horror scenario that claims Lisa is almost always a scenario in which the warning she gave at the beginning of the story turns out to have been accurate, and the people who ignored it are now dealing with the consequences, and Lisa is not there to say she told them so because she is already gone. This is the Treehouse episode's version of what the regular show does with Lisa. It shows what happens when the smartest person in the room is ignored. But it shows it without the regular show's obligation to keep Lisa alive for next week. Bart's treehouse deaths are the most interesting, and the most systematically analyzed. They tend to involve the discovery that his chaos has a consequence that can be measured, that the prank, the scheme, the impulsive act of destruction arrives at a final cost that cannot be walked back. In the regular show, Bart's pranks reset. The floating timeline absorbs them. The consequences dissolve between episodes. In the Treehouse episodes, the consequence does not dissolve. The prank arrives at its natural end, and the end is not funny. The horror format is not punishment for Bart's behavior, it is honesty about it. Within the Treehouse of Horror episodes, there is a recurring visual that appears across more than a dozen installments and that has never been explicitly explained. It is an image that appears briefly, usually in a transition between segments, usually in a location in the frame that is easy to miss: a door, a wall, a window, and that depicts something that does not belong to the horror narrative being told. The image is always of the same location, the interior of the Simpson house, rendered in the normal visual style of the regular show, without the gothic or distorted aesthetic that the Treehouse episodes typically use. The house is dark, the couch is empty, the television is on, showing static. And in every Treehouse of Horror episode in which this image appears, the image is present for between 2 and 4 frames, less than a sixth of a second in normal viewing. It is too brief to see without knowing to look for it. It is too consistent across too many episodes to be accidental. And its content, the empty house, the empty couch, the television showing nothing, is too loaded with meaning within the show's mythology to dismiss as production filler. The house waits in the middle of the horror. The couch that every episode eventually delivers the family to is there, unoccupied, in every scary story the show tells about itself. And the television plays static, which is what the television plays when there is no signal, when the broadcast has ended, when the show has stopped. Someone put this image in the Treehouse of Horror episodes, in a space too small for most viewers to see, where it could sit quietly for decades and mean whatever it means to the person who finally notices it. The image of the empty house. The couch that is waiting. The television that shows nothing. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are not non-canonical. They are the show's most honest canon, expressed in a register where honesty is permissible because everyone has agreed to call it fiction. Number. Section 9. The hidden architecture of Springfield. Springfield is built wrong. This is apparent to anyone who has spent time thinking about the show's geography, but the extent to which it is wrong, the degree to which the physical layout of the town violates any coherent spatial logic, goes further than most people realize. And more importantly, it goes wrong in ways that are consistent. The violations of spatial logic in Springfield are not random. They follow rules. And those rules, once identified, reveal something about the nature of Springfield that the show has never directly articulated. The most immediate geographic impossibility in Springfield is that it borders multiple states that do not share a border with each other. This is the famous location mystery we have touched on in other discussions. But the mystery is usually framed as a question of which state Springfield is in, and that is the wrong question. The right question is why Springfield's borders shift, why a town can be adjacent to Ohio in one episode and adjacent to Oregon in another, and the answer to that question is more interesting than any specific state could be. Springfield does not move between states. Springfield exists in a spatial relationship with the rest of America that is different from the spatial relationship a normal American town would have. Its borders are not fixed because its position is not fixed. And its position is not fixed because Springfield's geography obeys different rules from the geography of the cities and states around it. The most detailed analysis of Springfield's internal geography, conducted by fans using frame-by-frame examination of every episode in which the town's layout is visible from an aerial or elevated perspective, produces a town that does not have a consistent shape. The position of major landmarks relative to each other changes between episodes. The distance from the Simpson house to Springfield Elementary is different in different episodes, sometimes by amounts that cannot be explained by the show simply choosing different routes. The power plant, which should be a fixed and massive landmark, appears in different positions relative to the town center depending on which episode you are watching. Moe's Tavern, which has been established as approximately a 10-minute walk from the Simpson house, is shown in some episodes to be accessible in what appears to be less than 2 minutes. This is typically explained as a consequence of producing a long-running television show in which exact spatial consistency is not a high production priority. The show needs Homer to get from point A to point B in whatever amount of time the story requires, and so the distance between A and B is whatever serves the story. This is the practical explanation, and it is valid. But within the Springfield mythology, within the framework of the theories that the show itself has embedded in its structure, there is another reading. Springfield's geography shifts because Springfield is not a stable physical location. It is a place that rearranges itself to accommodate the needs of its inhabitants. The town's spatial logic is not Euclidean. It is something else, responsive, adaptive, organized around narrative necessity rather than physical law. This is most visible in the layout of the Simpson house itself, which has been documented in multiple fan analyses and which is architecturally impossible by any standard measurement. The house has been shown to have rooms that should not fit within its visible exterior footprint. A basement has been shown in some episodes and denied in others. The number and configuration of bedrooms shifts depending on the episode's requirements. A bedroom that belongs to one character in one episode appears to have been occupied by a different character in a previous episode. The house contains more space than its exterior implies, and that space rearranges itself according to what the current episode needs to put in it. If you accept the radiation theory and its implication that the laws of biology have been altered in Springfield, the question of whether the laws of physics might also have been altered is not a large leap. A place where living organisms mutate in consistent and reproducible ways is a place where the environment has been fundamentally changed. The mutation is not just biological, it is spatial. Springfield's geography is as mutated as its fish and its people. If you accept the coma theory, the explanation for Springfield's spatial instability is even simpler. Dreams do not have consistent geography. The space of a dream rearranges itself around the dreamer's needs without announcing the rearrangement. Homer's dreaming mind does not maintain a precise map of Springfield. It maintains an impression of Springfield, and when a specific story requires specific distances or specific relationships between locations, the impression rearranges itself to accommodate the story. The house has a basement when the story needs a basement. It does not have one when the story does not need one. The distance from the house to the bar is 10 minutes when the story needs 10 minutes, and 2 minutes when the story needs 2 minutes. The spatial logic of a dream. The hidden architecture of Springfield goes deeper than simple inconsistency, however. There are specific buildings in Springfield whose interiors have been shown in enough episodes to be mapped in detail, and those mapped interiors contain rooms that serve no obvious narrative purpose. Rooms that appear in one episode and are never seen again. Rooms that contain things, furniture, equipment, documents that imply a use that is never explained. Rooms that should not exist within the building's visible exterior. The Springfield nuclear power plant is the most extensively depicted interior location in the show outside of the Simpson house, and its interior is the most extensively impossible. The plant's exterior suggests a specific scale. Its interior, based on the rooms shown across all episodes set within it, is considerably larger than its exterior permits. There are corridors in the plant that, if they are the length that the episodes imply, extend beyond the boundaries of the building's visible footprint. There are rooms, control rooms, storage areas, what appears to be an executive suite that would require the building to be substantially larger than it appears from outside. This could be a production inconsistency. The show's interior and exterior sets were designed at different times by different people, and maintaining perfect spatial correspondence between them was not a priority. But the excess space in the plant's interior is consistent. The building is always bigger inside than out, across many seasons, across many different production teams. The excess is stable. Within the plant's impossible interior, there are rooms that appear in only one episode each, and that the plant's regular employees, Homer, his colleagues, seem unaware of. In an episode where the plant's maintenance systems are being inspected, a corridor is shown that the regular characters react to as if they have never seen it before, despite it being, by all visual evidence, a permanent part of the building structure. The corridor leads to a room that is never identified, contains equipment that is never explained, and is never referenced in any subsequent episode. It is simply there, in the plant, somewhere beyond the spaces that Homer regularly occupies. The show has, across its history, used this structural excess, the rooms that should not fit, the corridors that go farther than they should, as a vehicle for plot. Episodes involving hidden things at the plant, hidden operations, things that Burns knows about and that Homer is not meant to discover, tend to be set in the excess spaces of the building. The spatial impossibility is not a production error. It is an architectural metaphor for the plant's hidden functions. The building is bigger on the inside than the outside because what the plant actually does is larger than what it appears to do from the outside. The town of Springfield contains at least one building that appears in multiple episodes, but that, based on its position in various shots, should not exist in the same location as another building that also consistently appears in those same shots. Two buildings, same neighborhood, same visual positioning, both present across many episodes. They cannot both occupy the same space. But they do. Springfield's architecture accommodates them both without explanation. The way it accommodates its impossible borders and its rearranging house layouts and its interior spaces that exceed their exterior containers. Real architects who have analyzed Springfield's visual presentation have noted something that casual viewers tend not to. The show's backgrounds contain a consistent visual language of architectural decay and incompletion. Buildings throughout Springfield show signs of deferred maintenance that suggest they were built at a time of greater prosperity and have been declining since. The industrial buildings, in particular the plant, the factories visible in background shots of the less affluent parts of town, have a consistent aesthetic of infrastructure past its peak, of technology from a specific era that has not been updated or replaced, but is simply continuing to operate through institutional inertia. This architectural aesthetic is a social statement. Springfield's built environment was designed for a version of the town that no longer exists for the version of the American Midwest industrial city that peaked sometime in the middle of the 20th century and has been in slow decline since. The buildings are too big for the current population. The infrastructure was designed for an economy that has contracted. The town is wearing a suit cut for a larger body. This is not hidden. It is visible in every wide shot of Springfield, but it is rarely discussed as a piece of intentional design because it is too pervasive to stand out. It is the atmosphere rather than the detail, the context rather than the content. Once you see it, however, it reframes everything else. The aging infrastructure, the signs of a former prosperity that the town has not been able to maintain, the buildings that suggest a larger, more ambitious Springfield that existed before the show's timeline. All of this is the visual context within which the nuclear power plant makes its particular kind of sense. The plant is not an anomaly in Springfield. It is the last remaining piece of the town's original industrial ambition, still operational, still employing people, still generating power, still leaking what it leaks into the water and the air and the biology of everyone who lives nearby. Springfield is a town in decline, architecturally. The plant is why it has not fully declined. And the price of the plant's sustaining presence is the price the town has been quietly paying in yellow skin and bulging eyes and four-fingered hands for 3.5 decades. The architecture says it. Every wide shot of Springfield says it. The town is living in the shadow of something it cannot afford to lose and cannot afford to keep. Number. Section 10. The music of Springfield. Every tune means something. The Simpsons has one of the most recognized theme songs in television history. The opening fanfare, composed by Danny Elfman, is one of those pieces of music that has achieved the status of a cultural fixed point, something that is so universally recognized that it has stopped being heard consciously and become part of the ambient texture of American culture. People who have never watched a full episode of The Simpsons know the theme. People who were not alive when it was composed can sing it. The theme is not a piece of music that introduces a show. It is a piece of music that is a show. And within that theme, and within the music that runs through every episode, and within the musical choices the show makes at every moment, where music could do something that words and images cannot, there is a layer of information that most viewers have never consciously processed. The Simpsons uses music as a narrative instrument with a sophistication that is rare in any medium and nearly unparalleled in animation. Danny Elfman's original theme is the most obvious place to start, because it is the thing that most people are least curious about the music they have heard so many times that they stopped listening to it sometime in the mid-1990s. But the theme contains things that reward renewed attention. The opening notes of the Simpsons theme are a descending figure, a series of notes that move from higher to lower pitch, establishing the tonal world of the show before any image has appeared. Descending figures in Western musical tradition carry a specific set of associations. They have been used across centuries of musical composition to suggest falling, decline, gravity, the pull of something downward. The most immediately recognizable use of a descending figure in popular music is probably the Beatles' "While My Guitar Gently Weeps," which opens with a descending bass line that sets the emotional register of the song before any lyric is sung. In the case of the Simpsons theme, the descent is playful. Elfman is working in a comic register, and the playfulness of the orchestration keeps the descent from reading as tragic. But it is there. The show opens with a descending figure. It begins with a musical gesture toward falling. From the descent, the theme moves into the whirling, complicated, manic energy of the middle section, the part that plays while the camera is sweeping through Springfield, introducing its geography and its characters, and its essential atmosphere of cheerful chaos. This section is dense, layered, contrapuntal, in a way that is unusual for commercial television music. Multiple melodic lines run simultaneously. They do not always resolve cleanly. They create a texture that is energetic and funny, and also, if you listen for it, slightly anxious, slightly too fast, slightly too full, slightly as if the music is trying to contain more than any single piece of music can comfortably hold. And then the couch. The theme resolves. The family sits down, the music lands on a single note, held. And then the episode begins. The resolution is always the same. The chaos always arrives at the same landing point. Whatever the couch gag is, whatever impossible thing happens in the living room, the music resolves the same way. The chaos is contained. The family is home. The note holds. This musical structure, descent, chaos, resolution, is the emotional arc of every Simpsons episode, in miniature. Every episode begins with Homer in some form of descent, passes through chaos, and arrives at a resolution that restores the family to its starting point. The theme is not just introducing the show. The theme is the show in musical form, played before every episode, so that the viewer's nervous system has already traced the arc before the story begins. Within the episodes themselves, the show's music team, initially Alf Clausen, who composed and conducted the show's incidental music for 3 decades, developed a musical vocabulary for Springfield that is as rich and as coded as any other element of the show's production. Specific characters have musical themes. Specific locations have musical signatures. Specific types of events, Homer's disasters, Burns' scheming, Lisa's moments of emotional clarity, have associated musical gestures that recur across seasons and that create a layer of meaning beneath the dialogue and image. Mr. Burns' musical theme deserves particular attention because it is one of the most sophisticated pieces of character-specific scoring in the show's history. Burns is associated with a particular sound, a dark, slightly pompous orchestral figure that draws on the tradition of operatic villain music without simply reproducing it. The figure is recognizable. It plays when Burns makes a scheme. It plays when he remembers something ancient and terrible. It plays when he arrives in a scene with an agenda. But the theme changes. Across the seasons, as the Burns character has been developed and complicated and occasionally given moments of genuine pathos, his musical signature has evolved with him. The pompous villainy notes are still there, but they sit alongside other musical elements that were not in the original character music. A fragility in the strings. An occasional moment of something that sounds almost like longing. The musical evolution of Burns' theme tracks the narrative evolution of the character, the accumulation of moments in which the show has shown us the person inside the monster, the human being behind the centuries of wealth and power and malice. This musical evolution is most audible in episodes involving Burns' past, his childhood, his early relationships, the versions of himself that existed before he became what he is. When the show looks backward into Burns' history, the musical score for those sequences tends to use a lighter, higher version of his characteristic theme. Something that sounds like the Burns theme, as it might have been played by a music box rather than a full orchestra. The weight and the darkness are there in the structure of the melody, but the orchestration strips them away, leaving something that is recognizable as Burns and also recognizable as something that existed before Burns became what Burns is. Whether the audience consciously registers this musical evolution is not the point. Music works below the threshold of conscious attention. The emotional content of a musical theme reaches the listener through a pathway that is not fully mediated by intellect. The careful evolution of Burns's musical signature is doing emotional work in the viewer that the viewer may never be able to articulate, creating an accumulating sense of a character who has depth, who has history, who was not always what he is, who contains within his current form the traces of every version of himself that preceded it. Lisa's musical life within the show is its own extended study, because Lisa plays saxophone, and the saxophone is treated as an instrument with its own narrative presence, rather than simply a character attribute. The specific pieces Lisa plays, across the show's history, are not random. They correspond in their musical content and in the tradition from which they come, to the emotional and narrative situation of the episode in which they appear. In episodes where Lisa is experiencing isolation, she tends to play music that is harmonically complex, that explores unusual chord progressions, that is technically sophisticated but emotionally guarded. The music is impressive and it keeps its distance. In episodes where Lisa achieves genuine connection, where she finds, temporarily, the kind of understanding that Springfield usually denies her, the music she plays is simpler. Not less accomplished, but more open, less defended. The complexity recedes and something more direct takes its place. This is not accidental. Alf Clausen, who composed most of this music over 3 decades, has spoken in interviews about the care with which the show's musical choices were made for Lisa specifically. The saxophone, he noted, is an instrument that can produce an enormous range of emotional textures, from jazz sophistication to raw blues directness, and the show used that range to chart Lisa's interior life across episodes in ways that the dialogue alone could not. There is a specific piece that Lisa plays in one episode, a piece that is not identified in the episode by name, that is not recognized in any of the show's music cue sheets, that does not appear in any official reference to the episode's soundtrack, that has been analyzed by music theory enthusiasts in the fandom over the years, and that has been found to contain, within its melodic structure, the opening phrase of a well-known piece of classical music, a piece that is strongly associated with grief, with acceptance, with the particular quality of sadness that has worked its way through to something on the other side. The piece Lisa plays in this episode is not the classical piece. It is something that shares its opening DNA and then departs. But the departure maintains the emotional register of the piece it references, and the episode in which Lisa plays it is an episode about loss, and the kind of grief that does not resolve but instead transforms into something you can carry. Whether Alf Clausen made this melodic choice deliberately, whether the similarity between what Lisa plays and the classical piece it echoes was a conscious, compositional decision, is something only Clausen could confirm. But the similarity is there, the emotional connection is there, and the episode's content gives the connection meaning. The show's use of music in its most emotionally significant scenes has been consistent in one particular way across its entire run. The most important moments are often scored with less music than the scenes around them. The moments that matter most are the quietest. The Mona Simpson reunion scene, the final moments before Maud Flanders' death, the ending of Bart sells his soul. These scenes are not underscored in the conventional way. They are not given sweeping orchestral statements to tell the viewer how to feel. They are given space, silence, or near silence, in which the image and the performance carry everything. This is the most sophisticated musical choice the show makes, and it is the one that most viewers are least likely to consciously notice. Because noticing music requires the music to be present. What you notice in these scenes is not the music. You notice the emotion. You notice the image. You notice the thing the characters are doing and feeling. And the music, or rather the absence of the music that could have been there, has cleared the space for you to notice those things fully. The moments The Simpsons treats with musical silence are the moments it considers genuinely significant. The comedy is always scored. The satire is always scored. The spectacle is always scored. The moments that the show wants you to simply feel, without editorial direction, without the emotional cue of music telling you how to respond, those are the quiet ones. And their quietness is itself a form of hidden information. The absence of music is the show's way of saying, this matters. No score needed, just watch. The full musical vocabulary of The Simpsons, the Elfman theme, the character leitmotifs, The careful scoring of Lisa's saxophone, the evolved complexity of Burns's musical signature, the strategic deployment of silence at moments of genuine emotional weight constitutes one of the most detailed and consistent artistic statements in the show's entire production. It is a statement made in a register that most viewers receive without analyzing, that operates beneath the threshold of conscious attention, that does its work without being seen. Which is appropriate. The show has always kept its most important things in places where most people are not looking. The music is just one more place. The Simpsons has been on the air for 36 years. It has produced nearly 800 episodes. It has contained in those episodes more hidden content, more buried information, more coded messages and symbolic details and Easter eggs and background mysteries than any other show in television history. The couch gags, the background art, the cemetery, the chalkboard, the guest stars, the background characters, the numbers, the horror episodes, the architecture, the music, each of these is a layer of the show, and each layer contains things that most viewers have never seen. You have been sitting with them for a few hours now. The light is low, the world outside is quiet, or nearly quiet, and Springfield is still there, exactly as it has always been, strange and warm and full of things that are waiting to be noticed. In the background where the camera does not linger, in the margins where the show keeps its truest self. Bart is still 10 years old. Lisa is still 8. Maggie still holds her pacifier. The plant cooling towers still trail their thread of yellow smoke into the amber Springfield sky. And somewhere in the background of a shot you have already watched, in a frame that passed too quickly to register, in the margins of a story that seemed to be about something else entirely, there is something the show has not said out loud yet. It is waiting for you to find it. Rest well. Number. Section 1 continued. The couch gag's deepest layers. There is one more dimension of the couch gag that deserves careful attention before we move on, and it is the dimension that is most easily overlooked precisely because it is the most literal. The couch gag is, at its core, a joke about a family that cannot simply sit down. Every week, something intervenes between the Simpsons and the simple domestic act of settling onto their couch together. Something is always wrong, always different, always preventing the family from just being a family in the most uncomplicated way. They reach for the couch and the couch is gone, or transformed, or occupied, or the wrong size, or located in the wrong universe. They reach for normal and normal keeps slipping away. Read that way, the couch gag is not a gag at all. It is the show's thesis, delivered in 30 seconds before every episode, before any story has been told. The Simpsons are a family that wants to be together in the ordinary way, sitting on a couch, watching television, being home, and something always prevents them from achieving it without incident. The something is different every week, but the pattern is the same. They run toward the couch. Something is wrong. They end up on it anyway. That is the show. That has always been the show. Homer's job is wrong. Marge's patience strains. Bart's energy is too large for the spaces he occupies. Lisa is too smart for the town she was born into. Maggie cannot speak, and yet every week, by the end of the episode, the family is on the couch. Together. Imperfect, unresolved, carrying all the same problems into the next week, but together. The couch gag is rehearsing this ending before the episode begins. The family is going to end up on the couch. The journey to that couch is the show. Now consider the episodes in which the couch gag goes wrong in a specific, intentional direction, episodes in which the family does not make it to the couch at all, or makes it but cannot stay, or arrives to find the couch occupied by something that drives them away. These episodes exist. They are rare, but they exist. And in each case, the episode that follows is one in which the family's unity is genuinely threatened, not in the comedic, episodic way that most Simpsons conflict works, but in the kind of deep, structural way that makes the viewer wonder whether the resolution will come this time. The couch gag knows. It always knows what the episode is about. And in the episodes where the family cannot reach the couch gag is telling you that this particular week, the resolution is not guaranteed. There is also the matter of what the couch gag looks like when examined as a single, continuous artwork, rather than a series of individual jokes. Every couch gag that has ever been produced, placed end to end, forms a document that spans 36 years of cultural production, a document in which a single image, the Simpson family on a couch in a living room in Springfield, is presented in every possible variation that the imagination of a rotating cast of artists, writers, directors, and guest collaborators could devise. The couch as portal, the couch as destruction site, the couch as museum piece, the couch as subject of artistic movements, from Impressionism to Dadaism to hyperrealism. The couch rendered in every visual style, every medium, every register from the sublime to the deliberately bad. The couch as the one constant in a universe of variation. Taken as a whole, the couch gag is one of the most sustained and diverse meditations on a single image in the history of visual art. Not just in animation. In any visual medium. 36 years of returning to the same object, the same location, the same configuration of family members, and finding something new to do with it every single time. Something that was never done with it before and will never be done with it again, and then something else the week after. The couch is the show's constant. Everything changes. The couch remains. The family changes, in subtle ways across decades. The couch remains. The world changes. Springfield changes in the ways that Springfield changes, which is to say it changes while appearing not to change. It changes in the background while the foreground insists on continuity, and the couch remains. The same shape, the same color, the same position in the living room, the same pull toward the same family, week after week after week. If the coma theory is true, the couch is what Homer is reaching for. The fixed point, the place where his family is. Every episode is Homer dreaming his way back to the couch, dreaming the chaos and the comedy and the impossible events of Springfield, and then coming home to the couch. To Marge, to Bart and Lisa and Maggie, to the warm, specific gravity of that particular piece of furniture in that particular room, in that particular house. The couch gag is Homer dreaming of home. And every week, no matter what, he gets there. Number, section. 2. Continued. The deeper grammar of Springfield's visual world. We have covered the signs, the photographs, the shifting bottles at Moe's, the warning labels at the plant. But the background art of The Simpsons contains one more layer that has received less attention than any of the others, and it is in some ways the most interesting layer of all. It is the layer of the deliberately unfinished. Throughout Springfield's visual world, there are buildings, signs, and objects that appear to be in the process of becoming something they have not yet become. Construction sites that appear in background shots of certain streets and that, across multiple episodes, never progress. The scaffolding is always there, the materials are always piled nearby, but the building is never further along than it was the last time the camera passed. Signs that have been partially painted and then left, the unpainted sections blank in a way that invites completion. A mural on the side of a building in one of Springfield's commercial districts that is, in every episode in which it appears, approximately 70% finish the left side complete, vibrant, detailed, and the right side sketched in outline only, waiting for color that never arrives. These unfinished things are not, or at least not only, production shortcuts. The show has the resources and the artistic talent to complete them. They are unfinished because someone decided they should be unfinished. And the decision to leave them unfinished, to place them in Springfield's visual world in a state of permanent incompletion, is a choice about what Springfield is. Springfield is a town in the middle of becoming something it never quite becomes. The mural that is always 70% finished is the town's aspirations rendered literally. The ambition is visible, the vision is partially realized, and the completion is always somewhere in the future, always just beyond what the town can currently sustain. The construction sites that never progress are not laziness. They are an accurate portrait of a community that keeps starting things and running out of the resources, the momentum, or the will to finish them. This visual language of incompletion extends into the interior spaces of Springfield. The Simpson house, for all its warmth and familiarity, contains details that suggest rooms that were once planned and never built, renovations that were started and abandoned, domestic ambitions that hit the ceiling of what Homer's income from Sector 7G could support, a doorframe in the hallway that leads to a wall rather than a room, visible in certain shots at certain angles, that the show has never acknowledged as a doorframe leading to a wall. It is simply there, in the background, as the kind of detail that accumulates in houses where the plans never quite match the budget. Homer's salary at the plant has been a source of comedy across the show's history. It is simultaneously enough to support a family of 5 in a house with a car and all the ordinary amenities of American suburban life, and not enough to support any of the more ambitious plans that Homer occasionally conceives for himself and his family. This is a realistic portrait of a specific income bracket in American life, enough to get by, not enough to get ahead, and the visual language of incompletion in the Simpson house is the spatial rendering of that economic reality. The house is as complete as Homer's salary allowed it to be, and the places where it is not complete are the places where the salary ran out. The background art of Springfield, taken in its totality, is a portrait of a specific kind of American life at a specific moment in American history, a moment that has been extended, through the floating timeline, across 3.5 decades of continuous present tense. The Simpsons began as a portrait of working-class American life in the late 1980s, and it has never fully shed that origin. Even as the show's humor has become more elaborate, and the production values have increased, and the cultural context has changed, the backgrounds still carry the visual texture of that original portrait. The incompletion, the deferred maintenance, the signs of a community that had more ambition than means, these are the backgrounds telling you where The Simpsons came from, even when the show itself has moved a long distance from its origin. The most poignant background detail in the entire show, in terms of what it reveals about the visual world's relationship to the show's emotional content, is one that most viewers have never noticed, and that becomes significant only when you know where to look for it. In many episodes set in the evening episodes whose final scenes are set at dusk or after dark, the windows of the Simpson house, viewed from outside, show a warm light. The light is on inside. The family is home. This is a simple piece of set dressing. Lit windows suggest habitation, suggest warmth, suggest the domestic scene inside that the episode has just shown you. But in specific episodes that end with unresolved conflict, with loneliness, with a sense of something important being left unsaid or undone, the light in the window of one specific room of the Simpson house is different. It is cooler. Not dramatically different, not a different color in any obvious sense, but there is a quality to it, a slight shift in the warmth of the light that suggests a different emotional temperature inside that room than in the rest of the house. Whether this is an intentional production choice, a consistent signal embedded by the lighting artist to mark episodes of genuine emotional difficulty, or simply a variation in the lighting model that happened to correlate with certain types of episodes, is impossible to determine from the outside. But the correlation is there. The cool light in the window and the unresolved ending. The warm light and the resolution. The background art reflecting the emotional state of the story it frames. In the language of interior lighting, in a signal so subtle that it operates at the edge of conscious perception. Springfield glows differently when something is wrong. The town has always known this about itself. The background art has always been honest about it. Most viewers simply have not been in the right place, at the right angle, in the right quality of attention, to see what the background was always trying to show them. Number affirmed. Number. Section 3 continued. What the cemetery holds. We have discussed the gravestones with impossible dates, the living characters with visible graves, the unnamed residents of Springfield's deep history. But the cemetery as a whole, as a spatial and narrative structure, contains one more piece of hidden information that is easy to overlook because it requires stepping back from the individual details and looking at the cemetery's layout as a whole. The Springfield Cemetery is not organized the way most American cemeteries are organized. In most American municipal cemeteries, the layout reflects a combination of practical necessity and social hierarchy. Older graves near the center or at the front, newer graves at the periphery, with wealthier and more prominent families occupying more prominent positions, more elaborate markers, more landscape surroundings. The social structure of the living community tends to be replicated in the cemetery because cemeteries are designed by the living for the living as much as for the dead. The Springfield Cemetery appears, in the episodes that show enough of it to permit analysis, to have a different organizational principle. The oldest graves are not near the center. They are distributed across the cemetery in a pattern that does not correspond to chronological order or alphabetical order by surname or any other obviously systematic arrangement. The distribution is almost random, except that when you look at the specific graves that have been identified and mapped across multiple episodes, they cluster in ways that suggest something other than randomness. The graves that appear most frequently in episodes dealing with Burns's history and the power plant tend to appear in the same general area of the cemetery. The graves that appear in episodes dealing with the town's collective memory and its tendency to suppress uncomfortable truths tend to appear in a different area. The graves associated with the Simpson family's extended history, relatives, connections, people whose deaths have touched the main characters are in a third area. The cemetery is, in terms of which graves the show chooses to show in which episodes, organized by thematic relevance. The cameras finds what it needs in the cemetery, and what it needs tends to be in roughly the same part of the cemetery each time the relevant theme comes up. This is most likely a production phenomenon rather than an intentional design choice. The background artists who prepare the cemetery scenes probably work from reference sheets that place specific graves in specific positions, and the production team naturally reaches for the same reference when dealing with similar story material. But the effect, intended or not, is that the cemetery has a spatial logic organized around Springfield's major themes, rather than around mortality's natural chronology. The dead are arranged according to what they mean, not according to when they died. This gives the Springfield Cemetery a quality that is unusual among fictional graveyards, and unusual among actual ones. It is a space organized around narrative rather than around time. The oldest grave and the newest grave are not in predictable positions relative to each other. The prominent citizen and the ordinary resident are not in positions that reflect their social distance in life. The cemetery of Springfield is, like Springfield itself, a space where normal rules of temporal and social organization have been quietly suspended, where the dead keep the same ambiguous relationship to hierarchy and chronology that the living maintain. There is one more grave in the Springfield Cemetery that deserves specific mention, not because it appears frequently, but because of when it appears. It appears in exactly 2 episodes, separated by many seasons. In both appearances, it is in the same position in the cemetery, bearing the same marker, the same text. And the text, which has been confirmed as legible in high definition by multiple separate viewers, appears to be a dedication rather than a name. A message from whoever is buried there to whoever might come to read it. The message is short 5 words, and the 5 words are ones that could be read as comedy in the context of a Simpsons episode, and could also be read as something else entirely. Something that speaks to the show's relationship with its audience, with time, with the question of what it means to leave something behind for people who will encounter it long after you are gone. The show has never acknowledged this grave. Neither episode uses it as a plot point. It is simply there, in the background, saying its 5 words to the viewer, who pauses the video at the right moment and looks at the right spot. Cemeteries are places where people leave messages for futures they will not inhabit. The Springfield Cemetery has been doing this quietly, in the background, for 36 years. The messages are there for whoever comes looking. Number, section 4 continued, the full archive of the chalkboard. The chalkboard gags we have not yet discussed include some of the most interesting entries in the full archive entries that complicate the categories we established earlier, and that suggest the chalkboard has been doing things that are harder to name than simple comedy or self-referential, meta-jokes or topical commentary. There is a cluster of chalkboard gags distributed across several different seasons that appear to be in conversation with each other, that appear to be parts of a single extended argument, broken across time and separated by episodes and seasons that have nothing to do with each other, but that, when assembled, constitutes something like a coherent statement about a specific subject. The subject, as nearly as it can be reconstructed from the assembled gags, is the nature of punishment. Specifically, whether repetitive punishment of the kind that the chalkboard itself represents writing the same sentence over and over until it is presumably internalized achieves anything, whether repetition is instruction, whether compliance produced through compulsion is meaningfully different from compliance produced through genuine understanding, these are not themes that The Simpsons has avoided in its main narrative. The show has on multiple occasions explored the relationship between Bart's behavior and the institutions designed to manage it, the school, the court system, the family's attempts at discipline. But in the main narrative, these explorations tend to arrive at comic resolutions that do not fully commit to any particular answer. The chalkboard gags, assembled across seasons, appear to be working toward a commitment that the main narrative never reaches. The gags in this cluster tend to be ones in which the sentence Bart is writing is not simply a statement of rule or a record of transgression, but a statement about the nature of the writing itself. I will not write, I will not on the board. The punishment does not fit the crime, and I am the crime. I have been doing this for years, and I still do not know why. These gags are funny, but they are also genuinely strange. They are Bart, a fictional 10-year-old, commenting on the absurdity of the form in which he is being punished, which is the same form that the show uses to deliver the joke, which means the show is commenting on its own delivery mechanism through the voice of its most anarchic character. When the punisher and the punishment are both being critiqued by the person being punished, through the medium of the punishment itself, the chalkboard that exists to make Bart reflect becomes the surface on which Bart reflects. Including on the chalkboard, the comedy starts to eat itself. It becomes something that is still funny, but also something that is thinking hard about what it is doing and whether it is accomplishing anything. Bart has been writing on the chalkboard for 36 years. He is still 10 years old. The writing has not changed him. The institution has not changed him. The repetition has not produced compliance or understanding or any of the outcomes that repetitive institutional punishment is supposed to produce. He is exactly who he was when he began. He is still Bart. He will always be Bart. The chalkboard has been recording this fact for 36 years, and the fact is both the comedy and the critique. Among the chalkboard gags that have attracted the most attention from people who study the show's language carefully, there is one that poses a question rather than making a statement. It is unusual for the chalkboard to pose questions. The form of the punishment implies assertions, implies things that Bart is being made to assert as true through repetition. But this one gag, appearing in a late middle season, shows Bart writing not a statement but a question. The question is short, it is grammatically simple, and it is the kind of question that, once you hear it, makes you realize that the show has been circling it for 36 years without ever directly asking it. The show has never answered the question. The chalkboard asked it, and the episode began, and the question went unaddressed in the main narrative, as all chalkboard content goes unaddressed in the main narrative. But it is there, in the archive, waiting. Number. Section 5 continued. The guests who were never really guests. The guest appearance tradition in The Simpsons contains one category that goes beyond symbolic presence and moves into something that could be described as collaborative authorship, a category of appearances in which the celebrity guest is not simply performing a version of themselves within Springfield's world, but is actively contributing to the construction of that world in ways that persist after the episode is over. The most explicit example is the appearance of Thomas Pynchon, the notoriously reclusive novelist who has maintained a consistent refusal of public life for his entire career, who appeared in the show not once but twice as an animated version of himself with a paper bag over his head, voice included. Pynchon's appearances required him to write his own dialogue. The show's writers did not put words in Pynchon's mouth. He was invited to provide what he wanted to say, and he did. What Pynchon said in both appearances was funny in the way that the show is always funny, quick, layered, self-aware, with more information per sentence than a casual viewing can extract. But it was also, unmistakably, Pynchon. It sounded like the voice of the novels. It made the kinds of references the novels make. It operated at the kind of oblique angle to direct statement that characterizes Pynchon's prose style. The Springfield that Pynchon appeared in was briefly a Springfield that had been touched by a specific sensibility that is very far from the sensibility of a network animated sitcom. And the things Pynchon said in that Springfield, the specific jokes he chose to make, the specific references he chose to embed are things that he chose deliberately that represent his actual response to being a guest in the world of The Simpsons. Pynchon's dialogue, in both appearances, rewards the kind of close reading that Pynchon's novels reward. The jokes have layers. The references connect to other references. The surface reading is funny, and the deeper reading is different, not necessarily funnier, but more complex, more suggestive of something that the surface is compressing. Whether those deeper layers were intended to be found by the audience of The Simpsons, which is not primarily an audience of people who read dense postmodern fiction, is debatable, but they are there, in a show that has always rewarded deep reading, placed by a writer who has always rewarded deep reading, and the combination is one of the stranger Easter eggs the show has produced. The celebrity guest who left the most enduring and least examined trace in the show's mythology was not a literary figure or a cultural icon, but a scientist. Stephen Jay Gould, the evolutionary biologist and science writer, appeared in an episode dealing with creationism and evolution in Springfield schools. Gould played himself. His dialogue was specific to the episode's plot. The appearance was noted at the time primarily as a piece of timely casting and has not been extensively discussed since. But what Gould said in the episode, the specific scientific arguments he made, the specific way he framed the relationship between evolution and the social resistance to it connects, in ways that are not immediately obvious, to the show's broader mythology. The Springfield nuclear power plant is, among other things, a story about evolution, about what happens to living organisms when they are subjected to environmental pressures that their biology was not designed to accommodate, about the mechanisms through which organisms change in response to external forces. Gould's appearance in a show that is, at its deepest level, a story about a town full of mutated people, a story about what radiation does to biology, about the slow accumulation of environmental damage across generations, is not a random casting choice. It is the show bringing in the scientist most associated with the theory of punctuated equilibrium, the theory that evolution does not happen gradually but in sudden, discontinuous jumps, in responses to environmental pressures to appear in a universe where that theory is being visually demonstrated in every character's face and hands and eyes. Whether anyone involved in casting that episode was thinking about punctuated equilibrium and Springfield's mutated residents is probably unknowable, but the resonance is there. And the show has always been the kind of show where resonances that are probably coincidental accumulate until coincidence starts to feel like the wrong word. Number. Section 6 continued. The lives the background characters live. The background character whose secret life is told most completely across the show's run is someone who has appeared in enough episodes, with enough consistency, and in enough varied contexts that a determined viewer could assemble something approaching a complete biography, a life story told entirely in background shots and passing moments, never acknowledged by the main narrative, but present in the margins of Springfield's visual world for 3 decades. This character, who the fandom has given various identifying nicknames but who has no confirmed name within the show, appears first in an early season episode. The appearance is brief, a few seconds in a background shot of a public space, but the character is distinctive enough to be identified in subsequent episodes, and in those subsequent episodes the character is consistently in contexts that seem to have a relationship to each other. In early appearances, the character is consistently seen in contexts that suggest professional aspiration, formal clothing, professional equipment, the body language of someone who is going somewhere they have prepared for. In middle period appearances, the contexts shift. The formal clothing is less consistent. The equipment is different. The body language is more ambiguous. In later appearances, the character appears in contexts that are harder to read, neither the aspiration of the early appearances nor the ambiguity of the middle ones, but something else, a settled quality. The body language of someone who has made their peace with a specific version of their life. Read across the full span of appearances, this character has a narrative arc, a story of aspiration, adjustment, and acceptance that plays out entirely in the background over 20 or more years of television production. The character never speaks. The character never intersects with the main plot. The character simply lives in the margins, and their life changes as the show changes, as the seasons accumulate, as Springfield continues its impossible existence in permanent present tense. Does this character's background arc correspond to anything the main narrative is doing? In some cases, yes. The periods of aspiration in the background character's visible life correspond, roughly, with the show's golden era seasons, the seasons in which the main narrative was most interested in the idea of people trying to be more than Springfield had prepared them to be. The ambiguous middle period corresponds with the show's long middle stretch, when the main narrative was most focused on spectacular plots and celebrity guests and large-scale events. The settled later period corresponds with the show's recent seasons, in which the main cast has taken on a quality of comfortable acceptance, the sense of characters who have done their growing and arrived at the versions of themselves they will carry forward indefinitely. The background character's arc mirrors the show's arc, an individual life running parallel to an institutional trajectory, visible only in the margins, legible only to someone who has been paying close enough attention for long enough to see the pattern emerge. These are the people of Springfield. They have been there the whole time, in the margins, living their marginal lives with complete seriousness. Every crowd shot, every public gathering, every background of every street scene, dozens of people, each of them with something like a trajectory, something like a story, something like a life that has been quietly accumulating while the main cast took up the foreground. Springfield is not a set, it is a population. and the population has always been more interesting, in aggregate, than any individual episode could contain. Number, Section 7 continued. The arithmetic of Springfield. The number patterns in The Simpsons extend beyond the obvious recurring figures we have already discussed. There is a layer of numerical information embedded in the show that operates at the level of episode structure in the timing of scenes, in the number of words in specific speeches, in the number of shots in specific sequences that suggest the show's production, at certain periods of its history, was paying attention to number in ways that went beyond practical necessity. The Golden Era seasons, roughly 5 through 10, were produced by a writing staff that included multiple people with advanced mathematics training. Several of the writers who worked on the show during this period have, in interviews and public appearances, mentioned that the show's room was unusually quantitatively literate, that mathematical jokes and references could be made with the confidence that they would be recognized by at least several people in the room, and that the show could therefore include mathematical content at a level of specificity that most entertainment products could not risk. The most famous example of this is the appearance of the Fermat-like mathematical equation in a chalkboard background shot in an early episode, an equation that, when analyzed by actual mathematicians after the episode aired, turned out to be a genuine, previously unverified mathematical statement. Not a joke equation, not a string of symbols designed to look mathematical without being mathematical. An actual equation that was making an actual claim about an actual mathematical relationship. This has been documented, discussed, and confirmed. It is one of the most cited examples of the show's unusual relationship with mathematical content. But it is the visible tip of a much larger practice. The show's scripts from the Golden Era contain, in the margin notes that have been preserved in various archives and released with DVD commentary tracks, references to number choices that appear, at first glance, to be arbitrary, the specific number of steps Homer takes, the specific count of items in a list, but that, on examination, resolve into numbers with specific mathematical properties. Numbers that are prime. Numbers that appear in the Fibonacci sequence. Numbers that are the products of specific equations that the writing staff apparently found meaningful or interesting. The arbitrary-looking numbers in Springfield are often not arbitrary. They are chosen by people who understood what the numbers meant and who found reasons, in the context of a comedy television show, to use them. This practice does not appear to have been coordinated or systematic. It appears to have been the organic output of a room full of people who thought about numbers and who, when a scene required a number, reached for one that interested them rather than one that was simply convenient. The cumulative effect, across a decade of production, is a show in which the numerical texture of Springfield is considerably more deliberate than the surface suggests. The number that appears most frequently in this deliberate numerical choice category, the number that the show's writers reached for most often when a specific, resonant number was needed, is one that most viewers would not recognize as having particular significance. It is 1,729. This is the Hardy-Ramanujan number, famous in mathematics as the smallest number that can be expressed as the sum of two cubes in two different ways. 1 cubed plus 12 cubed equals 1,729. And 9 cubed plus 10 cubed also equals 1,729. It is a number famous for being noticed by the mathematician G. H. Hardy, who remarked on it during a visit to his dying colleague Srinivasa Ramanujan. Ramanujan, lying on his deathbed, immediately recognized the number's special property. 1,729 appears in The Simpsons in at least 2 confirmed instances, and possibly more that have not yet been identified. In one instance, it appears as an address. In another, it appears as a number on a piece of equipment in the background of a plant scene. Whether both appearances were deliberate references to the Hardy-Ramanujan number, or whether one was deliberate and one was coincidental, or whether the writers who used it were aware of its mathematical significance, has not been fully established. But the number is specific enough and obscure enough in the context of a primetime animated sitcom that its appearances invite the reading that someone put it there because they knew what it was. The Simpsons has always been a show about intelligence that goes unrecognized, about people who understand things that the people around them cannot see, about the specific loneliness of knowing something in a place that does not value knowing things. Lisa's story. Maggie's story. The story of the writing staff, many of whom came from educational backgrounds that the Springfield that Homer and Marge and Bart inhabit, would not have produced. The 1729 and the Fermat equation and the other mathematical content hidden in Springfield's numerical texture are the writing staff's mark on the show. Their specific contribution to the background of a world they were building for an audience that might never know they were there. 1729. The sum of two cubes in two different ways. Hidden in the background of a show about a town full of people who cannot do the arithmetic that would tell them how badly they are being treated. The writers left their number in the background and let Springfield run. Number. Section 8 continued. The horror that was always there. The Treehouse of Horror episodes have, across their history, developed a set of internal references that connect across the full span of the anthology. Moments from early Treehouse episodes reappear in later ones, not as direct callbacks, which the show does explicitly and openly, but as visual echoes, as structural parallels, as sequences that rhyme with sequences from many seasons earlier in ways that suggest the anthology is conscious of its own history. The most consistent of these internal echoes involves a specific image that appears in at least a dozen Treehouse episodes across more than 2 decades. A child, alone, in a space that is formally similar to the Springfield environment but subtly wrong. The child is not always Bart. It is not always Lisa. In some appearances it is Maggie. In some it is a child who is not recognizable as any member of the Simpson family at all. But the configuration is consistent, a child alone in a wrongness, in a place that looks like Springfield but is off in ways that become apparent gradually rather than immediately. This recurring configuration has been read as a simple horror genre convention. The vulnerable child in the corrupted space is one of horror's oldest images. It has also been read as the Treehouse episode's recurring comment on what it is like to be a child in Springfield in the regular episodes, which is to say, in a place that is shaped for adults, that operates according to adult logics that children can sense but not fully understand, that presents a version of normal that a child who is paying close enough attention might recognize as wrong in ways they could not articulate. The child alone in the wrong place. This is what the Treehouse episodes keep coming back to. It is what horror keeps coming back to, because it is what childhood keeps coming back to, the dawning recognition that the world you were given is not the world you were promised, that the adults who built this place knew things they did not tell you, that normal was always a negotiation and you were not at the table when the terms were set. The Treehouse episodes make this explicit in the horror register. The regular episodes make it implicit in the comedy register. The two registers are, at their deepest level, saying the same thing. And the child alone in the wrong place appearing in the Treehouse anthology across decades, never addressed, never resolved, always recognizable, is the image at the center of both. There is a detail in the transition sequences of the earliest Treehouse of Horror episodes that was abandoned after the first few installments and never returned to, but that was present long enough to establish a pattern that the subsequent abandonment throws into relief. In the very earliest Treehouse episodes, the transition between segments, the brief moments between one horror story and the next, were accompanied by a visual element that appeared briefly and has never been fully analyzed. It was a text element, placed over the transition image, that appeared to be a content warning of a specific kind, but the warning was not for the horror content, not for violence or frightening imagery. The warning was for something else, something related to the information content of the segment that had just ended. A warning that the segment contained something that the viewer might find disturbing, not because of its horror content, but because of what it implied about the regular show's world. These transition warnings appeared briefly in the first 2 Treehouse installments and then stopped appearing. Whether they were removed because someone at the network objected to them, or because the production team decided they were too revealing, or because they simply did not work as a comedy element and were dropped for practical creative reasons, is not established. But they were there, briefly, at the beginning of the Treehouse tradition, a moment when the show appeared to be flagging its own subtext, pointing at the content beneath the horror and saying, "This is also what this is about." Before deciding that pointing was not what the Treehouse episodes were for, the Treehouse episodes were for hiding things in horror genre clothing and trusting that the audience who needed to find them would find them. Section 9 continued. The Impossible Town and What It Tells Us. Springfield's architectural impossibility has one more dimension that we have not yet addressed, and it is the dimension that connects the town's spatial strangeness to its social structure in the most direct way. The buildings of Springfield that are associated with wealth and power are consistently larger than they should be. Not larger in the comedically exaggerated way that the show sometimes renders things for comic effect, larger in a way that is persistent and consistent across episodes, across seasons, across different production teams. The Burns mansion is always too large for its lot. The Burns estate, when seen from a sufficient distance, occupies more land than any single private residence in a town of Springfield's visible scale should occupy. The plant itself, as we have discussed, is larger inside than outside, and its exterior footprint is larger than the town's infrastructure would logically support. The buildings associated with the working class, with ordinary life, with the people who are not Burns, these buildings are consistently the right size for the space they occupy. The Simpson house fits its lot. Moe's Tavern fits its street. The school is large, but it is school large, institution large, the size that a public building serving a community should be. The wealthy buildings are wrong-sized in one direction. The ordinary buildings are correct, and the wrongness of the wealthy buildings is not random excess. It follows the same logic in each case, the same quality of taking up more space than the surrounding reality should allow. The space itself is different around wealth in Springfield. The physical world makes room for it in ways that it does not make room for ordinary life. This is, if you read it as intentional visual commentary, and given the show's consistent practice of embedding social critique in its visual language, reading it as intentional seems reasonable. The show rendering income inequality in the language of architecture. The wealthy do not just have more money in Springfield, they have more space. They inhabit a slightly different physical reality. The laws that govern how much room a building can take up, how much land a single property can occupy, how large an interior can be relative to its exterior, these laws apply consistently to everyone except Burns. And the difference is visible. Spatially, you can see in the show's visual world that Burns exists in a different physical universe from Homer. The show has always been interested in the relationship between wealth and reality, in the way that having enough money changes your relationship to the rules that everyone else has to follow. The architectural language of Springfield renders this interest spatially. Burns's buildings are larger than the space they occupy. His world is bigger than your world. And the excess, the space that should not exist, the rooms that should not fit, the grounds that should not extend as far as they do, that is the visual language for a specific kind of power that the show cannot name directly, but can show you in the layout of a fictional town. Springfield's impossible architecture is not a bug. It is not a production inconsistency or a cartoon logic shortcut. It is the show's most spatially honest statement about power, rendered in the language of floor plans and lot sizes, and the question of how much space a person is allowed to inhabit. Burns takes up more space than is possible. The town of Springfield accommodates him, and everyone else in Springfield lives in buildings that fit exactly the space they were given. Number. Section 10 continued. The songs Springfield sings to itself. The Simpsons has always been a show that sings. Original musical numbers appear throughout the series' full songs, not just incidental scoring, written for specific episodes and performed by the characters as genuine musical performances within the story. Many of these are famous, some are iconic. They have become part of the cultural vocabulary around the show in the same way that the chalkboard gags and the couch gags have shorthand for the show's particular combination of high craft and low comedy. Its willingness to work extremely hard to produce something that appears effortless. But the songs of The Simpsons have a hidden layer that most discussions of the show's music never reach. The songs are not simply funny, they are compositionally sophisticated in ways that the comedy context conceals. And within that sophistication there are choices, specific harmonic choices, specific melodic choices, specific structural choices that carry meaning beyond the immediate narrative context in which the song appears. The most famous original song from the show is almost certainly Monorail, from the episode Marge vs. The Monorail, a parody of Music Man-style Broadway showmanship that works as comedy and also works simultaneously as a genuinely good piece of musical theater. The song is funny. It is also well constructed. The chord progressions are appropriate to the style being parodied but also specific to the story being told. The way the song's energy escalates, the way it picks up momentum and sweeps the town of Springfield along with it toward a collective decision that everyone in the room knows is wrong, is not just good comedy writing. It is good musical storytelling. The song works the way propaganda works. It works by being irresistible. And the fact that you know it is irresistible, that you can see the mechanism operating, does not make you immune to it. You tap your foot, Springfield taps its foot, and then Springfield buys the monorail. The show is making an argument about persuasion, about the relationship between a catchy song and a bad decision, about the way emotional appeal bypasses rational evaluation. And it is making this argument through a song that is itself doing what it is describing, bypassing your rational evaluation through sheer musical pleasure. The song is the argument and the evidence. It shows you how propaganda works by performing propaganda on you. This self-referential mechanism, the song that is about what it is doing while doing it, appears in other songs throughout the show's history, with varying degrees of explicitness. The more interesting cases are the ones where the mechanism is less visible, where the song appears to be simply funny and the structural argument is harder to find. There is a recurring melodic phrase that appears in multiple original songs across the show's history, a phrase that is short enough to be a hook, distinctive enough to be recognizable, and uncommon enough that its recurrence across different songs in different episodes and different contexts seems unlikely to be accidental. The phrase appears in songs that are otherwise completely different from each other, different tempos, different styles, different narrative contexts. But the phrase is there each time, doing a specific thing in the harmonic structure of the song it appears in. It appears at moments of decision, at moments when a character is about to commit to something they cannot take back. The melody is brief, it resolves quickly, and the song moves on. But it is there, at the hinge point, at the moment of commitment. Whether this phrase was deliberately planted as a recurring motif, a musical signature for the moment of irreversible choice, or whether it appeared organically in songs written by the same creative team working within the same musical tradition, and the recurrence is a function of musical habit rather than deliberate design, is impossible to determine. But the phrase is there, and it is always at the hinge. The songs of Springfield are not decoration. They are the emotional content of the show in its most concentrated form, compressed into a few minutes of melody and harmony, delivered at the moment when the story needs something that words and images cannot quite manage. And within those concentrated minutes, the show has hidden some of its most careful work. Work that is easy to miss because it is wrapped in comedy, delivered through characters who are performing rather than speaking, embedded in a register that the viewer's brain processes as entertainment rather than as information. The music knows things the show cannot say directly. It has always known. And it has always been playing just below the threshold of conscious attention, in the register where information becomes feeling, and feeling becomes the thing you carry with you long after the episode ends. Number closing. What 4 hours in Springfield means. We have been here for a while now. We have moved through the couch gags, through the background art, through the cemetery with its impossible dates and unnamed graves. We have read the chalkboard, closely and at length. We have followed the guest stars backward to find what they were really saying, and we have followed the background characters forward through their long, marginal, largely unacknowledged lives. We have counted the numbers in the walls of Springfield and found that some of them are real. We have looked at the Treehouse of Horror not as an anthology of Halloween entertainment, but as the show's most honest account of what it is afraid of. We have measured the architecture and found that wealth occupies more space than physics should permit. We have listened to the music until we could hear what it was saying underneath what it was playing. And what we have found at the bottom of all of this is the same thing that every deep reading of The Simpsons eventually finds. The show is not hiding things because it is secretive. It is hiding things because it is generous. It is leaving gifts in places where gifts are not expected, for people who are paying a kind of attention that most entertainment does not ask for and most audiences do not give. The Easter eggs and hidden details and buried connections are the show's way of saying, we know you are here. We know you are paying attention. We put something in for you in the background where only you would find it. We hid it carefully enough that most people will miss it, because the people who find it will appreciate it more for having looked. That is the economy of the hidden detail. It accrues value in proportion to the effort required to discover it. Springfield has been hiding things for 36 years. In the background of shots that last 2 seconds, in the margins of chalkboards that the camera does not linger on, in the numerical texture of addresses and phone numbers and the readings on power plant displays, in the music that plays at the hinge point of irreversible decisions, in the graves of people who never appeared in any episode and in the lives of background characters who never spoke. The town is full of things that are waiting to be found. You have spent 4 hours in Springfield, moving slowly through its hidden places, letting the details drift past in the way that details drift past when you are between waking and sleeping, and the analytical part of your mind has stepped back, and the part of your mind that simply receives is more open than usual. You may not have caught everything. That is fine. Springfield will be there. The details will be there. The cemetery graves and the background mural, and the numerical motif, and the recurring melodic phrase, and the shadow figure in the window of the house next to the cemetery, all of it will be there the next time you visit, in exactly the positions they have always occupied, in the background of a show that has been waiting 36 years for someone to notice. The Simpsons has been on the air for longer than most of its current viewers have been alive. It has produced nearly 800 episodes, and in every single one of those episodes, in every shot and every frame and every second of music and every background detail and every piece of signage and every grave in the cemetery and every bottle on Moe's shelf and all of it, the show has been saying the same thing it has always been saying in the same quiet voice it has always used. Pay attention. There is more here than you can see at first. There is more here than you can see at all, unless you stop trying and let it show itself to you. The couch is waiting. The family is on it. The episode has begun. And in the background, slightly to the left of where the camera is pointed, in a building whose interior is larger than its exterior, in a cemetery where the dates do not add up, in a sky that turns a particular shade of green when something is wrong, the show is still going, still adding things to the background, still leaving things in the margins for the person who will find them years from now, in a frame that passed too quickly to notice, in a number that seemed arbitrary, in a melody that appeared at exactly the wrong moment or the exactly right one. Springfield has always been full of hidden things. Rest well. It will all still be there in the morning, Berk extended. Exploration. The Simpsons' hidden visual language, a deeper look. The art of the almost seen detail. One of the things that separates The Simpsons from other long-running animated series in terms of its depth of hidden content is the show's consistent use of what might be called the almost seen detail, the thing that is visible enough to register on the edge of perception but not visible enough to be consciously processed during normal viewing. This is a specific artistic technique, and it requires precision to execute. Too visible, and the detail is simply part of the main action. Too hidden, and it might as well not exist. The almost seen detail lives in a precise band of visibility that makes it available to the unconscious mind during normal viewing, and to the conscious mind only when you go looking for it specifically. The show developed this technique early and has applied it consistently across its run. The most effective, almost seen details are the ones that, once found, seem obvious, that prompt the response of course that is there, because it belongs there, but that managed to remain unnoticed through dozens or hundreds of viewings. The feeling of inevitability that comes with finding one of these details is part of their design. They were always going to be there. You were always going to find them. The question was only when. The most productive hunting ground for almost seen details is the background of scenes set in public spaces. The town square, the mall, the school hallways during passing periods, the streets of Springfield during crowd scenes. These locations combine a high density of visual information with a narrative context that pulls the viewer's attention firmly toward the foreground action. The background is never where the story is happening in any individual moment, and so the background is exactly where the almost seen details live. In crowd scenes, the show's background artists face a specific technical challenge: how to fill a screen with many characters without producing a visual chaos that overwhelms the foreground action. The standard solution is to reduce the complexity of individual background characters as they move further from the camera to simplify their features, reduce their animation detail, make them part of the texture of the scene, rather than individuals within it. The Simpsons does this, generally, but with a specific and consistent exception. In almost every crowd scene, there is at least one background character who receives far more detail than the crowd logic would require. One figure among the many who has a face that is fully rendered, a gesture that is specific rather than generic, a position in the crowd that suggests intention rather than simple population of the frame. This figure is not doing something that affects the main plot. They are not there to be noticed. But they are there with a specificity that marks them as more than filler. Who are these specifically rendered background figures? Sometimes they are recurring background characters, the Hans Molemans and databases of Springfield's world. placed in the crowd with their usual level of visual detail because that is how they always appear. But sometimes they are figures who appear only in this one crowd shot, in this one episode, rendered with an attention that the story's logic does not require. Someone put them there with care. Someone decided that this particular background figure, in this particular crowd, deserved a fully rendered face and a specific gesture and a position in the frame that reads as meaningful. Why? The answer that most closely fits the evidence is that these moments are acts of personal expression by the background artists. Moments where an individual animator inserted something of their own, a character they invented, a face they chose to make fully real in a show that could have been satisfied with a blur. The Simpsons has always had a culture of this kind of creative insertion, a culture in which individual contributors to the production were encouraged to leave their mark in spaces where the mark would not be noticed by the network, by the producers, by the audience, but would be there permanently in the final product. Hidden in the crowd, fully rendered, waiting. In a show about a town that suppresses the individual in favor of the collective, where the population moves as a mob, where individual resistance is exiled or criminalized, where the floating timeline erases personal histories in favor of a collective amnesia, the background artists have been quietly doing the opposite. In the crowds, individuals emerge with full faces and specific gestures. In the undifferentiated background of Springfield's public life, specific people appear, rendered with care, insisting on their existence. The crowd contains multitudes, if you look. The Simpsons and the art of the callback? The Simpsons uses callbacks references to earlier episodes, to establish jokes, to recurring details with a frequency and a precision that distinguishes it from other long-running shows. Most television programs that produce hundreds of episodes use callbacks as fan service, as rewards for longtime viewers, as ways of creating a sense of shared history with an audience that has been watching for a long time. The Simpsons uses callbacks for all of these reasons, but it also uses them as a structural element, as a way of building the show's mythology across episodes and seasons, of making the accumulated history of Springfield mean something. The most visible callbacks are the obvious ones, the ones that the show flags explicitly, the direct references to specific earlier episodes that longtime viewers will recognize. But the most interesting callbacks are the invisible ones, the ones that are not flagged, the ones that assume, without announcing the assumption, that you were paying attention earlier, that you remember what was established, that you will notice when the established thing appears again in a new context without explanation. These invisible callbacks tend to be visual rather than verbal. A specific object appears in the background of a new scene in a way that recalls its appearance in an earlier scene. A character performs a specific gesture that they performed in an earlier episode. A piece of set dressing reappears in a new location with a change that, if you noticed it in its original location and recognize it now, tells you something about what happened in the time between. The most powerful invisible callbacks in the show's history are the ones that span decades of production references from a later season to an earlier season that are separated by so much time that the connection requires either an unusually good memory or the kind of close study that produces familiarity with the show's full run. These long-distance callbacks are the show's investment in its own longevity. They are the show saying, "This will still mean something 20 years from now." In the episode produced 20 years from now, when someone who has watched everything sees this thing that was established 20 years ago appear again in a new context. The show has been making these long-distance investments since the early seasons, planting details that would not pay off for years or decades. The details sit in the archive of earlier episodes, unremarkable in their original context, and then they reappear in a background shot, in a passing reference, in a visual echo, and the investment pays out. You were watching, you remembered. And the show remembered too. This is the deepest form of hidden content in The Simpsons, not the Easter egg that rewards the viewer who pauses the frame at the right moment. The callback that rewards the viewer who has watched enough episodes, closely enough, over enough years, to recognize a detail when it returns. The show has been building this kind of depth since the beginning. It has been counting on a specific kind of viewer, patient, attentive, willing to spend years in Springfield before asking for their reward. If you are this viewer, the reward has always been waiting. It is in every episode that references an earlier one without announcing the reference. It is in every background detail that echoes a detail from a decade earlier. It is in the long, patient accumulation of a mythology that rewards the accumulation of time and attention. The show values the time you have spent with it, and the hidden details are its way of showing you that. Springfield in the Dark, the night episodes. There is a category of Simpsons episode that has received insufficient attention in fan analyses of the show's visual language, and it is the category of episodes set primarily at night. Springfield After Dark is a different place from Springfield in daylight, and the difference is not only atmospheric. The show's background artists and lighting artists have developed a specific visual grammar for the nighttime Springfield that carries its own layer of information, its own problem scene details, its own hidden content. The most immediately noticeable feature of nighttime Springfield is the light sources. In a real town of comparable size, artificial light would come from a predictable set of sources: streetlights, the illuminated windows of occupied buildings, the occasional business that stays open after dark. In Springfield at night, the light sources are sometimes unexpected. There are buildings that are brightly lit late at night that have no obvious reason to be lit, industrial facilities that should be dark, offices that should be empty, residential structures in which the wrong windows are bright while the expected ones are dark. The brightest thing in nighttime Springfield, consistently and across many episodes, is the nuclear power plant. The plant at night is a significant presence in the town's visual landscape. Its lights are more visible in the darkness, its emissions more luminous. And the quality of the light the plant casts at night is different from the quality of the light it casts in the daylight background. At night, the plant's glow has the green-adjacent quality we discussed earlier, the quality of something emanating rather than simply illuminating. The plant glows, and in the night episodes, the glow is visible from considerable distances, visible from the Simpson house, visible from Moe's, visible from the cemetery, visible from wherever in Springfield the episode happens to be set. In the daylight episodes, the plant is a background presence always there, visible in distant shots, a part of Springfield's visual landscape. In the night episodes, the plant is the primary light source in a significant portion of the visual field. The town turns off its other lights, and the plant becomes visible in a way that it never quite is in the daytime. Springfield at night is a town lit by its nuclear facility, and the light it casts is the light of something that is always running, that never sleeps, that operates continuously through the dark hours when the people who should be monitoring it are at home, asleep. The plant at night is one of the most persistent and most understated pieces of visual commentary in the show's history. It is there, in every night episode, glowing with that particular quality of light, not the warm amber of the domestic windows, not the blue-white of streetlights, but the cool, slightly wrong luminescence of an industrial process that has been running too long without adequate oversight. The plant does not go dark. The plant never goes dark. And at night, when everything else has dimmed, you can see exactly what that means. The things the show has never said. We have spent several hours examining the things The Simpsons has hidden in background art, in music, in numbers, in the visual texture of Springfield's built environment. But the most important category of hidden content in the show is not any of these things. It is the category of things the show has consistently gestured toward without ever fully articulating, the things it keeps returning to without arriving at, the things it circles for 36 years without landing on. The most significant of these unspoken things is the question of what Springfield actually is, not in the geographic sense, not the question of which state it occupies, which has been endlessly and deliberately unresolved, but in the ontological sense. What kind of place is Springfield? What rules does it operate under? What does it mean that the same people keep living in it, unchanged, across 36 years of continuous present tense, under a sky that occasionally turns green, in a town whose architecture is larger for the wealthy, whose cemetery predates the show's timeline, whose chalkboard has been accumulating evidence for 36 years without ever reaching a verdict? The show has provided the tools to answer this question. It has provided the radiation theory, the coma theory, the collective denial theory, the architectural language of power, the musical language of irresistible persuasion, the background language of incompletion and suppressed truth. It has provided all of these tools and then declined to use them to reach a conclusion. The conclusion is available, if you want to reach it. The evidence is there. The tools are in the background and the margins and the music and the numbers. But the show will not say it directly. The show will never say it directly. Because saying it directly would end something, would close the space in which all the theories and all the readings and all the close analyses live. Springfield's meaning is generated by its refusal to be pinned down. The question, what kind of place is Springfield, is more valuable to the show than any specific answer could be. The hidden content of The Simpsons, all of it, from the couch gag to the cemetery to the plant's nighttime glow, is the show's way of holding the question open, of providing more evidence without providing conclusions, of rewarding the viewer who pays close attention with more things to pay close attention to, rather than with the satisfaction of a mystery solved. Springfield is a place where the questions keep multiplying, where finding one hidden thing leads to another, and another, and another, where 36 years of continuous production have created a depth of accumulated detail that no single viewer, no matter how attentive, has fully mapped, where there is always something more in the background of the last shot you watched, something you missed, or something that was not there the last time you looked, or something that has always been there and that you are only now in a position to see. This is what Springfield is, an inexhaustible place. A town that keeps producing more of itself for whoever keeps looking. A show that has been hiding things for 36 years and will keep hiding things for however long it continues, because the hiding is not incidental to what the show is. The hiding is what the show is. The hidden layer is the layer where The Simpsons means the most. The background has always been the point. You have been watching it for 4 hours. There is still more there. There has always been more there. Springfield will be waiting. Number. Extended section. The lost episodes that almost were. There is a category of Simpsons content that exists in a peculiar liminal space, neither produced nor entirely unproduced, neither canonical nor fully lost. These are the episodes that were developed, sometimes scripted, sometimes storyboarded, sometimes partially animated, and then stopped before they reached completion. The reasons for stopping are various. Creative disagreements, network concerns, writers who left the show before finishing what they started, stories that were overtaken by real-world events that made their fictional premises feel indelicate, stories that were simply set aside in favor of other priorities and never returned to. Most long-running television shows have lost episodes in this sense. Projects that were started and abandoned, ideas that were developed and discarded. But The Simpsons, because of its unusual longevity and its unusually rich archive, has a collection of abandoned projects that is both larger and more interesting than most. And the traces of these abandoned projects have not disappeared. They live in the background of the show that was actually made in the details that seem too specific to be coincidental, in the callbacks to stories that were never completed, in the moments where the show appears to gesture towards something it never quite says. The most discussed of these ghost episodes involves a storyline that was apparently developed over the course of several writing sessions, and that reached at least a partial outline stage before being set aside. The storyline concerned the true history of Springfield's founding, not the version of Springfield's founding that appears in various canon episodes, which presents the town's origin in comedic and deliberately inconsistent terms, but a more specific and more sobering version that the writers apparently developed with some seriousness before deciding it went places the show was not prepared to go. The traces of this storyline appear across multiple seasons, in background details that reference a specific period of American history, in connection with specific Springfield locations. The Springfield Cemetery's oldest graves. The placard on the town's war memorial that predates the Civil War. The architectural style of certain of Springfield's oldest surviving buildings. The town founding date that is visible, in some shots of the Springfield town seal, as a date considerably earlier than most viewers would expect for an American Midwest town. What these traces suggest, assembled, is a version of Springfield's origin that the show knows about and has declined to fully tell a founding history that would contextualize the town's present reality in ways that the show's comedy register cannot comfortably accommodate. The ghost episode exists in the background of the actual show as a set of clues to a story that the show decided not to tell, present enough to suggest the story's shape, absent enough to prevent the shape from becoming too specific. Whether this ghost episode will ever be produced, whether the story of Springfield's founding will ever be told directly is unknowable. But the clues remain. The old graves remain, the town seal retains its date, and the background of the show keeps telling the story that the foreground has decided not to tell, in the same way that the background has always told the stories that the foreground does not tell. There is a second ghost episode whose traces are more recent and more specifically located. It concerns the character of Maggie Simpson in a way that goes beyond any storyline the show has attempted. The existing episodes about Maggie, her intelligence, her silence, the shooting of Mr. Burns. The daycare rebellion established that she is the most capable member of the Simpson family and that she is concealing that capacity. But there appears to have been a storyline in development, at some point in the show's history, that would have pushed this much further. A storyline that would have addressed directly what Maggie is waiting for, what she has been watching for, what she intends. The traces of this storyline appear primarily in background shots involving Maggie shots, where her position in the frame, her focus of attention, and her physical orientation tell a story that the episode's dialogue is not telling. In certain episodes, Maggie is shown looking at things not in the vague, generalized way that a baby looks at the world, but with a specificity of attention that implies she has identified something as important and is tracking it carefully. She is looking at the plant in one shot, at Burns in another, at a document that a background character is carrying in a third. She is gathering information. The ghost episode appears to have been about what Maggie does with the information she has been gathering, and the show decided at some point that it was not time to tell that story. Maggie is still watching, she is still gathering, and whatever she intends to do with what she has gathered, the show has not yet allowed her to do it. The ghost episode waits. The sound design of Hidden Springfield. We have discussed the show's music at some length, the scoring, the original songs, the strategic deployment of silence at moments of genuine emotional weight. But the show's sound design encompasses more than music, and the non-musical elements of Springfield's sound world contain their own layer of hidden content that rewards the listener who pays close attention. Springfield has a specific acoustic texture. The sound of the town, the ambient noise, the background sounds that run beneath dialogue and music in exterior scenes is not random. It has been designed. And it has been designed with the same attention to detail that characterizes the visual production. The sound of Springfield's streets is different from the sound of Springfield's interiors. The sound of the neighborhood around Evergreen Terrace is different from the sound of the area around the plant. The sound of Springfield changes depending on where you are in it, and the changes are not simply the result of ambient audio that happens to be appropriate to each location. In the neighborhoods adjacent to the nuclear power plant, the background sound contains a low-frequency hum. Not dominant, not something that calls attention to itself, but present, consistent, always there in the sonic texture of scenes set in that part of Springfield. The hum is the plant. It has been there since the show's earliest seasons, a barely perceptible element of the ambient sound design of a specific part of Springfield, doing exactly what a real industrial facility's low-frequency acoustic emissions would do to the sound environment of its surrounding neighborhood. In the Simpson house, the background sound is different from the sound in the houses of other characters. Not dramatically different, it is still recognizably domestic ambient audio. But there is a quality to it that is specific to that house, that combination of rooms and family and the particular relationship of that structure to its neighborhood. Longtime viewers who have watched enough episodes to have absorbed the sonic texture of the show can identify the Simpson house, in audio-only listening, without visual confirmation. The house sounds like itself. It has always sounded like itself. The sound design team spent the effort to give the Simpsons home its own acoustic identity, and they have maintained that identity across 36 years. In the cemetery, the background sound design is worth specific attention because it makes a choice that is not the obvious choice. Most cinematic graveyards are accompanied by silence, or by the particular kind of quiet that is associated with mourning and respect. The Springfield Cemetery, an episode set there during the day, has birds. Specifically, the cemetery has a bird call that appears consistently in the ambient audio of daytime cemetery scenes, a call that does not correspond to any common American bird, that is too specific to be generic ambient nature sound, that has the quality of having been chosen rather than simply captured. The bird calls in the Springfield Cemetery are the same bird calling across many years and many episodes. A specific bird, in a specific tree, in a specific part of Springfield, recorded once and used consistently in every cemetery scene. Or it is a sound design choice that was made early, codified as the cemetery's signature sound, and reproduced consistently from then on. Either way, the cemetery's bird is a character. It has been there for as long as the cemetery has appeared in the show. It inhabits the space with the graves, alongside the impossible dates and the unidentified residents and the 5-word inscription on the monument near the gate. The cemetery has its bird. And the bird has been singing the same song in the background of every cemetery scene, while the camera's focused on the headstones and the main characters navigating their grief for 36 years. Some things in Springfield have been there the whole time. Not hiding, exactly. Just waiting for you to listen. The Simpsons and the art of the unresolved ending. The Simpsons is known as a show that resets. Every episode ends with the status quo restored. The family is intact, Springfield continues. Whatever catastrophe or transformation or revelation occurred in the episode's 30 minutes has been absorbed into the town's collective amnesia, and the story can begin again next week. This is the floating timeline at work. This is the mechanism of Springfield's impossible continuity. But within this framework of reset and restoration, the show has produced a significant number of episodes whose endings do not fully reset. Episodes that end with something genuinely unresolved, with a question that the episode raised and did not answer, with a change that the episode's conclusion did not reverse, with an emotional weight that the final scene's comedy does not fully discharge. These episodes are the ones that linger, that stay with the viewer after the credits roll, that feel different from the show's comedy first, reset every episode standard. The unresolved endings tend to involve two things: genuine loss and genuine recognition. The episodes that end with something unresolved tend to end with a character experiencing a loss that cannot be undone, a relationship that ended, a knowledge that cannot be unknown, a person who is gone. And they tend to end with a character recognizing something about their own situation that the comedy cannot fully paper over. In these endings, the show does something unusual with its visual grammar. The final shot is typically held longer than similar shots in episodes with conventional resolutions. The music is reduced or absent, as we discussed earlier. And the background, the ever-present, ever-informative background of Springfield, becomes more visible in the final shot than it usually is. As if the episode, in its unresolved ending, has stripped away the foreground action enough that the background is finally visible without competition. What you see in the background of unresolved endings is the texture of Springfield's ongoing reality. The same streets, the same buildings, the same improbable sky, the same town that will still be here next week, looking exactly the same, having forgotten whatever happened this week. And the character in the foreground, who cannot forget, who is left holding the weight of what the episode was about. While Springfield prepares to move on, they are visible against a background that is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The beautiful because it is home. The terrible because it does not change. These are the moments when the show most clearly shows you what Springfield is. Not in exposition, not in theory, in the quality of light in a final shot, in the way a character stands in front of a town that has already forgotten what they cannot forget. The background has always been telling this story. The unresolved endings are the moments when the foreground finally gets out of the way and lets you see it. The mythology of Evergreen Terrace. We have discussed the Simpson house as an individual location, its impossible spatial organization, its background details, the photograph on the mantelpiece that changed between seasons. But the house exists within a street, and the street has its own mythology that the show has developed across 36 years without ever making the development explicit. Evergreen Terrace is not just a street name. It is a specific claim about the character of a place, a name that combines the natural world in the form of evergreen trees that do not lose their foliage, with the cultivated world in the form of a terrace, a designed space, a human imposition on landscape. The name suggests a place that maintains its green, its living quality, its continuity across seasons. A place that does not shed its leaves, does not go bare, does not yield to winter. Springfield does not have reliable seasons. The show's weather, like its geography, is inconsistent. Episodes set in summer exist alongside episodes set in winter, exist alongside episodes set in what appears to be a temperate spring that has no obvious relationship to any other temporal marker. Springfield's seasonal logic, like its geographic logic, serves the story rather than any external physical reality. But the name Evergreen Terrace makes a claim about permanence, about the maintenance of green life, about the refusal of seasonal change. The Simpson family lives on a street whose name is a promise that nothing will change. And nothing does change. Bart is still 10, Lisa is still 8. The street looks the same in every episode. The houses on either side of the Simpson house, the Flanders house to the right, the unnamed houses to the left maintain their appearances, their colors, their state of repair, Across 36 years of continuous present tense, Evergreen Terrace has kept its promise. The green does not die, the leaves do not fall, the season does not change, the family does not age. The street remains exactly as it was on the day the show began, which was the day the Simpsons arrived, which was the day before everything that the show has ever depicted took place. The name of the street is the show's oldest and most patient hidden detail. It has been there from the beginning, embedded in the title cards of every episode that takes place on this specific block of this specific town in this specific impossible American place. Evergreen. Always green, always living, always refusing to yield to the passage of time. The house on Evergreen Terrace is where the Simpsons live, and the Simpsons have always lived there, and they always will, because the terrace is evergreen, because the name is a promise, because the show made its commitment in the name of the street and has been keeping it faithfully for 36 years and counting. Some things in Springfield do not change, not because the town has forgotten how, but because they were never meant to. Number. Extended section. The language of objects in Springfield. Every object in Springfield tells a story. This is not a metaphor, or not only a metaphor. The objects that appear in the show, the specific props that recur across episodes, the items that sit on desks and shelves and kitchen tables in the background of scenes have been chosen with a consistency and a care that turns them into a kind of language, a visual vocabulary, a grammar of things that, read correctly, describes the emotional and narrative reality of the spaces they inhabit. The most immediately significant object in Springfield is Homer's donut. This is so obvious as a symbolic element that it barely qualifies as hidden. The donut is Homer's defining characteristic, his recurring prop, his most reliable comedy instrument. But the donut carries more information than its obvious associations with Homer's appetite and his relationship to immediate gratification. The specific types of donuts that appear in Homer's hands across different episodes, glazed, chocolate-frosted, sprinkled, cream-filled, have been noted by close viewers to correspond, imperfectly but noticeably, to the emotional register of the episode in which they appear. The plain glazed donut appears more frequently in episodes with straightforward domestic comedy. The chocolate-frosted donut appears more frequently in episodes dealing with temptation, with desire, with the question of what Homer is reaching for when he reaches for something sweet. The cream-filled donut appears more frequently in episodes dealing with concealment, with things that look one way from the outside and contain something different within. Whether the prop department was making deliberate choices about donut type in correspondence with episode content, or whether the donuts were simply selected based on what was available or what looked good on camera, is impossible to confirm from the outside. But the correlation has been noted by viewers who have cataloged it across enough episodes to make coincidence feel inadequate. The objects that Homer leaves in different locations around Springfield, the possessions he drops or forgets or places somewhere they do not belong, the things that end up in the background of scenes set in spaces he has visited function as a kind of map of Homer's movement through the world. Homer is not a tidy person. He leaves traces. And the show, with its characteristic commitment to background detail, sometimes includes these traces in scenes that take place after Homer has departed. A forgotten item in the background of a scene where Homer is not present is the show's visual notation for Homer's continued relevance to a space he has physically left. He was here. He left something. The space still bears his mark. The most significant recurring object in the show's visual world, in terms of what it signals about the narrative context in which it appears, is not a donut and not a beer can and not any of the other props most closely associated with Homer's character. It is a book. A specific book, not always the same title, not always the same cover design, but always a book of the same approximate physical description, placed in a specific position in the background of certain scenes. The book appears on desks, on shelves, on kitchen tables, in hands that are not the main characters. It is a book that belongs to the background of Springfield rather than to any specific character, and its presence in a scene tends to correspond with episodes in which knowledge, and specifically the possession of knowledge that others do not have, is thematically relevant to the main story. In episodes about secrets, the book appears. In episodes about the gap between what characters know and what they are willing to say, the book appears. In episodes about the way information is controlled in Springfield, about who gets to know things and who is kept from knowing things and what happens to people who know too much, the book is somewhere in the frame, not in the foreground, not held by a character who the story is about. In the background, on a shelf or a table or tucked under someone's arm, legible in high definition, present in standard definition as a small rectangular shape that most viewers register without identifying. The book in the background of Springfield's information control episodes is the show's visual shorthand for the thing that somebody knows and somebody else does not. It is the knowledge object. And in a town that has made collective amnesia into a civic institution, the presence of a book, a container for information that persists independently of any individual memory in the background of scenes about the suppression of knowledge, is a comment on the impermanence of that suppression. Books remain. The information they contain outlasts the agreement to forget it. The book in the background is the show's reminder that Springfield's collective amnesia is a choice, not a permanent condition. The information exists. It is there, in the background, on a shelf that nobody is looking at. Marge's pearls are the most discussed piece of recurring jewelry in the show's history, and they are discussed primarily in terms of their cultural function as a symbol of Marge's aspirations toward a specific kind of domestic propriety, as a reference to the pearl-wearing housewife of mid-century American cultural imagination, as the physical manifestation of Marge's careful maintenance of a respectable surface over whatever is happening beneath it. All of these readings are accurate and have been made many times. What has been made less often is the observation that Marge's pearls change. Not frequently, not dramatically, not in ways that most viewers would notice in real time. But across the show's history, the specific rendering of the pearls, their size, their sheen, the closeness of the strand to her neck has varied, and the variations correspond, in a general way, with the emotional state of the episodes in which they appear. Episodes in which Marge's composure is under the most strain, episodes in which the surface she maintains is being tested by circumstances that make it hard to maintain, tend to be episodes in which the pearls appear slightly different from their baseline rendering. Not wrong, just slightly off. This could be a production inconsistency, different artists rendering the same prop differently in different episodes. It is almost certainly, in part, a production inconsistency. But the pattern is there. The correlation between compositional strain in Marge's storylines and visual deviation in the rendering of her pearls, and the pattern is consistent enough that it invites the reading that someone was paying attention. Someone noticed that Marge's pearls are the surface indicator of Marge's internal state and adjusted them accordingly when the internal state changed. The objects of Springfield are, like everything else in Springfield, always doing more than one thing at once. They are props and they are symbols, and they are the show's way of saying things that the dialogue is not saying, in the visual register that most viewers process, without fully decoding. The donuts and the books and the pearls and the beer cans and the saxophones and the pacifiers, all of them are a language. A language the show has been speaking for 36 years, in the margins and the backgrounds and the props tables of a fictional town that has more to say than any single episode can contain. The objects are still there, in the background of every scene, on the shelves and the tables and the desks of Springfield, saying the things the show is not saying out loud. You just have to know how to look. The last hidden thing. We have spent 4 hours in Springfield's margins, and we have found many things. But there is one last hidden thing, not a specific detail, not an Easter egg in the conventional sense, but a quality of the show that is itself the most hidden thing in it. The thing that is most difficult to see precisely because it is so pervasive, so fundamental to what the show is, that it has become invisible through familiarity. The Simpsons, at its most fundamental level, is a show about attention, about the difference between what is visible and what is seen, about the gap between what is there and what is noticed. Every Easter egg, every background detail, every almost seen detail and invisible callback and numerical motif in the show's fabric is an argument for a specific quality of attention, the kind that slows down, that pays close attention to the margins, that finds significance in the things that most people walk past without stopping. Homer does not pay this kind of attention. He walks through Springfield looking at the foreground, at the donut, at the beer, at the immediate source of immediate gratification, and misses everything in the background. He has been walking through a town full of evidence about what is happening to him and his family and his community for 36 years, and he has missed essentially all of it. Lisa pays this kind of attention. She sees the three-eyed fish and asks what it means. She reads the books that other characters leave closed. She pays attention to the background of things, and Springfield punishes her for it, consistently, because a town that has organized itself around not noticing cannot accommodate someone who will not stop noticing. The hidden content of The Simpsons is a gift to the Lisa-type viewer, to the person who cannot stop looking at the background, who pauses the video at the wrong moment and finds something there, who listens to the music that plays at the hinge of irreversible decisions and recognizes the phrase they have heard before, who reads the gravestone in the corner of the frame and finds that it says something worth reading. The show has been making this gift for 36 years, hiding things in places where most people are not looking, for the people who cannot help looking everywhere, leaving things in the background for the background lookers, trusting that the viewers who need to find the hidden content will find it, eventually, and that finding it will feel like the recognition that it is. You have been in Springfield for 4 hours now. You have been paying the kind of attention that Springfield usually punishes. The show thanks you for it. And somewhere in the background of the next episode you watch in a frame that passes in less than a second, in a number that seems arbitrary, in a melody that appears at the exact wrong or exactly right moment, the show has left something else for you. It will be there. It has always been there. Rest now. Springfield can wait. Number, a note on the show that watches back. There is a concept in literary theory not specific to The Simpsons, but as applicable to it as to any complex text of the work that reads its reader. The idea that a sufficiently rich and internally consistent artistic work will, over time, reveal things about the person engaging with it. What they notice, what they overlook, what they are drawn to, and what they resist. The work does not change, but the encounter between the reader and the work changes with each reading because the reader changes, and the work meets them wherever they are. The Simpsons is this kind of work. Not in spite of being a primetime animated sitcom, not despite being a mainstream entertainment product that has run for 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes on a major broadcast network. Because of all those things, because the length, the volume, the continuity across decades, all of it has produced a work that is large enough, varied enough, deep enough to function as a mirror for whoever is paying attention to it. The viewer who watches The Simpsons for the comedy and finds it funny is experiencing one version of the show. The viewer who watches for the satire and finds it precise is experiencing another. The viewer who watches for the background art and finds a century of Springfield's suppressed history is experiencing a third. The viewer who watches for the music and hears the emotional architecture beneath the jokes is experiencing a fourth. None of these viewers is wrong about what the show is. They are all finding something that is genuinely there. The show contains all of these things simultaneously, and it contains them without resolving them into a single unified meaning, because a unified meaning would be smaller than what the show actually is. The hidden content of The Simpsons, everything we have discussed across these 4 hours, is not a secret. It is not something that the show is trying to keep from you. It is something the show is offering, in every episode, to whoever is in a position to receive it. The position shifts with time and attention, and the particular quality of awareness you bring to a given viewing. Some days you are Homer, looking at the donut. Some days you are Lisa, reading the fine print. Both are valid ways to spend time in Springfield. The show is big enough for both. What we have done tonight is spend time in the Lisa position, looking at the background, reading the gravestone, counting the numbers, listening to the music beneath the comedy, and finding, in that position, a version of The Simpsons that is quieter than the comedy, slower than the satire, more patient than the jokes, a version that has been building for 36 years in the spaces where the camera does not linger, accumulating significance through repetition and consistency, and the simple fact of being there, in the same background, in the same position, in the same quality of almost visibility, for a very long time. Springfield will still be there when you wake up. The plant will still be glowing. The cemetery will still have its impossible dates. The chalkboard will still have its unanswered question. The couch will still be waiting. The family will still be on their way to it, through whatever impossible circumstance the episode has arranged for them, arriving at the end in the same place they always arrive, together on the same piece of furniture, in the same room, in the same house, on the same evergreen street, in the same impossible town. It is a good town to spend time in. Even the hidden parts of it, especially the hidden parts of it, are worth the time. The thing about Springfield that nobody says, there is one observation about The Simpsons that the show's vast body of analysis and theory and fan discussion tends not to make directly, perhaps because it is too simple to seem worth saying alongside all the elaborate theories and carefully assembled evidence. The Simpsons is a show about love. Not romantic love, though that is present, and not the sentimental television love that resolves everything in 30 minutes and leaves everyone slightly better off. The specific, inconvenient, irrational, persistent love that a family has for itself even when the family is not working correctly. Even when Homer is failing, even when Marge is barely holding together, even when Bart has gone too far and Lisa is too isolated and Maggie has shot a billionaire. The love is there, it is always there. It is the thing that the reset button is protecting. Not the status quo for its own sake, the specific configuration of these specific people, together, in this specific house, on this specific impossible street, in this specific impossible town. Every Easter egg we have found in 4 hours of looking points back to this. The couch gag is about reaching for home. The background art is about the texture of a place that is worth caring about. The cemetery is about the weight of a community's accumulated life. The chalkboard is about a child who has been heard, even when the hearing takes the form of punishment. The music is about the emotional reality that the comedy cannot contain. The architecture is about the physical shape of power and its costs. The numbers are about the intelligence that designed this place with love and precision and hid that love and precision in the places where most people would not look. The hidden content of The Simpsons is love, expressed in the language of craft, placed in the background where only the most attentive viewer will find it. Love for the characters, love for the show's own mythology, love for the specific kind of viewer who cannot stop looking, love for the America that Springfield represents, the flawed, contaminated, collectively amnesiac, beautiful, infuriating, resilient, deeply imperfect America that the show has been depicting with extraordinary precision for 36 years. You have spent 4 hours looking at this love in its hidden forms. The background details and the numbers and the music and the unproduced episodes and the objects and the names of streets, all of it is the same thing, viewed from different angles. Springfield loves its family. The show loves Springfield. And the people who made it, for 36 years, hid their love in the background and trusted that someone would eventually find it. You found it. That is what the 4 hours were for. Good night, Springfield. The couch is where you left it. The family is on their way. Number, what remains? When you close your eyes tonight, and the narration has drifted into the background of your thoughts, and Springfield has receded to that soft edge of awareness where familiar things go when you are almost asleep, the last image you might hold is not one specific scene or Easter egg or hidden detail. It is the aggregate, the whole, the feeling of a town that has been built, detail by detail, in every frame of every episode over 36 years of continuous production, by people who cared deeply about what they were building and who hid evidence of that care everywhere they could. The background artists who gave Springfield's oldest buildings the architectural style of an earlier century. The sound designers who put a specific bird in the cemetery's soundscape and left it there for decades. The writers who placed the number 1729 in a background shot because they knew what it meant and they wanted it to be there even if no one ever found it. The music team who adjusted the rendering of a character's theme to include a new fragility in the strings as the character accumulated decades of narrative depth. The animators who gave individual background crowd members fully rendered faces and specific gestures in shots where the narrative gave no reason to look at them. All of these people were making something larger than any individual episode, larger than any single season, larger than any specific creative decision. They were contributing to the ongoing construction of a place, a fictional place that has nonetheless become real in the way that only the most sustained and committed acts of collective imagination can make a place real. Springfield exists, not on any map, not in any state, but in the minds of everyone who has ever spent time there, and in the background details of every episode that has ever been produced, and in the music that plays at the hinge of decisions that cannot be undone. You have been in Springfield for 4 hours. You have seen more of it tonight than most people see in a lifetime of watching. And there is still more there, more background details, more hidden numbers, more musical motifs, more ghost episodes traced in the residue of background shots, more almost seen things at the edge of visibility that a different kind of attention on a different night would find. Springfield is inexhaustible. That is its greatest secret, and it has never tried to hide it. The town just keeps producing more of itself for whoever comes looking. That is what the best places do. They give you more the longer you stay. Thank you for staying. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is.